Oh
So
my
like,
God.
no, I don't. But it's like 99 sessions on Kenneth Smith is similar to 99 bottles of beer on the wall. And
Yeah, yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, that's about right. Well, why don't we dive into paragraph 12? I think we wrapped up 11 with our discussion of idiocy and what that means to the Greeks last week. And I'm sure that we'll have to remind ourselves of that almost every week because in modernity, we think idiot is an insult and it means dumb. And of course, the Greeks thought it meant something entirely different. It meant it's the human condition that we are idiots. And for two-thirds or more of human beings, we're doubly idiots because not only are they idiots, but they love their idiocy. They think the things that make them idiots are their best features and will change them as little as they can. So, so we with that established, we move on. And I'm thinking we might get through paragraphs 12 and 13 today. We'll see how we go. But we've built up a lot of momentum here. We've got a lot of meaning deciphered. So I'm just going to start with the text. Um, the Greek worldview of naturalism or organicism demands a fit of form to matter, virtually as good as nature itself has shown in living creatures or in the fit of organs to their tasks. Right. So this idea we talked about before of hule, the matter, and then what is the form that you were trying to make of the matter. They conceived of it in the way that's pretty much the opposite of the God of Genesis. Not that the maker can do whatever he wants, but that he has to respect to justice, as Socrates says, to the rights of the question before us. What is the matter? What is its nature? What is its character? What is its, given that character, what is its teleology? Where does it want to go? And only then, once you know those things, can you figure out what can I make of this? Because you can't make something of it that it doesn't want to be made into. And so the Greeks looked at human beings and human societies in these terms and said, if individual human psychology or character is the hule from which societies are to be built, then what is the character of a human being? What is its teleology? And then how can you structure a society that falls within the range of things that character wants to drive towards in order to make a society that works? Stephen, come off mute. Oh, you're off mute. Tell us what's on your hand.
Yeah, well, this particular view, now I'm not enormously well read in philosophy, but this particular view, I think, reflects, and a lot of stuff here reflects the heretical views of Goethe. You start quoting Goethe's views and go to jail, do not collect $200. Now, I only know this by references that there is a claim that this adulteration of the Greeks was championed by Goethe like nobody else. He saw the Greek society as the grand ideal, and this was widely mimicked. And this Smith's tractates here seem to reflect that sort of opinion. Now, Goethe was this person with a very, a belief in nature, according to nature. This is one of Goethe's huge lines, the idea that the organic aspect of nature is what is to be imitated. Now, of course, this is Goethe was basically a reactionary. I know enough to know that that Western civilizations, perhaps even 100 years prior to Goethe, but certainly by the late 17th century, had become a place of the mechanist, the bean counter, the person who saw art as frivolous. And of course, Goethe arises as a grand reaction against that sort of worldview. So I wonder about this. We're looking at these tractates, but it doesn't quote, it doesn't create references here, we lack references here, and where is Kenneth Smith getting his ideas from? like I said, they're similar to the romantic reaction of Goethe, which continues today.
Right.
Prior to the romantic reaction, we had the religious reaction amongst the Protestants against the state church.
Yeah.
You know, we were sold that we were going to have an individual conscience, and you've just given us another Catholic church in each country. Then there was the period known as the Awakening, which is a sort of a revival, pietism. And then succeeding that, after that, we have a new type of reaction, the romantic reaction. Now, after the romantic reaction, we have the existential reaction in the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it's not a coincidence that you see a lot of Goethe in this, because I mean Goethe was a classicist. You know, it's part of what made him a romantic, is that he was reading the ancients, and he was doing so at the same time that Hegel was. I mean, Hegel, for all that he comes across as dry, when you read him, under the surface, he's also a romantic. Um, I highly recommend this book. You can read it online for free. Check it out an hour at a time from the Internet Archive by Karl Löwit, From Hegel to Nietzsche. And it's about philosophy in 19th century Germany. But the very opening chapter talks about the friendship and correspondence of Hegel and Goethe, and how they both represented, well, as Löwit puts it, they both represented heretical positions. They both thought that they were Lutherans. They were devout Lutherans, and yet Martin Luther himself would have branded them both heretics because they were so far afield from what he believed. But that they sort of went, they each kind of took their reaction to the ancient Greeks and incorporating that into their Lutheranism in a different direction. So Goethe was more on the naturalist side, and Hegel was more on the idealist philosophical side, but they were still really kind of tethered together in that little triumvirate, you know, kind of resurrecting some of these Greek ideas and figuring out how to apply them. I haven't finished reading this book yet, but I really like what I've read so far, and it's on my short list to finish this year. So I think you might enjoy it, and it certainly is going to talk directly about these questions. The other question you asked about sort of what are all of Kenneth Smith's kind of influences, where is he getting this stuff? We're going to talk about that today, because paragraph 13 comes right out of Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. It's basically a capsule statement of the entire book. I was reviewing it this morning, thinking I would not have thought that you could boil down her entire book into one paragraph, and not one of Kenneth's longer paragraphs either. But I mean, he really does in paragraph 13. So I confirmed this week. I've been, one of my projects for the last 5 years has been trying to pin down where Kenneth got the idea of the trifold division of human character into the douloi, the banausoi, and aristoi. What are his sources for that? And I've looked at a lot of sources. I've found references in the ancient Greeks themselves, but putting it together with things that he's told me before, I'm pretty sure it is in fact Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. I went back through it, and she does define the doulos, she does define the banausos, and she does define the aristos, all three of them, each in its own chapter. You know, she's got the one on labor, the one on work, and the one on action, and those correspond to the three economic domains of the, you know, the oikos or household, the agora, you know, the marketplace slash crafts area, and then the res publica, you know, the political life of the polis. So
that might have antecedents. So, you know, famously, Walter Burley Griffin designs Australia's capital city on the free axis.
huh,
Oh, I'll find a reference for that.
yeah, please.
Okay,
That's
so.
interesting. I'd like to see that. Thanks, Stephen. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, what you said is interesting. I mean, it's like I want you to maybe explain a little bit further to clear it up. I always thought of Plato as an idealist of sorts, right? The form. But now you're potentially changing my mind, because it almost seems like the forms are well, I guess you could say it constrains the matter, but it almost seems like it's managing matter. So the basic structure really is matter itself, and the spirit of the soul is merely managing the matter rather than giving it a structure in a way. So because you mentioned about God could do anything he wants and create whatever. I mean, the Christian God, right? But God has to work with the damn clay or whatever it is to make the forms, right? So in some sense, he has to manage the material nature of the universe or being or whatever it is. And so he is only he's not a mayor, he's a manager. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that what you're saying about Plato? Because if that's true, then how come there's such a dissonance between Plato and Aristotle? Because they seem closer together, because Aristotle was always also trying to manage the material world as such as well. So how does that work? I mean, so it doesn't seem like he is as a radical a break from the pre-Socratics as I imagined it to be, but it was really more like I guess creating a better structure to manage the polis, so to speak, or human beings. Is that what you're saying? Because he's no longer really an idealist. He's really a materialist that's trying to like do his best. That doesn't jive with my previous understanding. but no, I mean, that's why I want you to clear it up because
Sure,
it does
sure.
seem like a very different picture of Plato.
Yeah.
If that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, let me shake it up. So I went into, when we first started doing these seminars, I would have said that Plato was an idealist.
Uh-huh.
But partially from working through the material and partially under the influence of Donald, and partially from all the other things I've been reading as a result of working with you guys, I've come around tentatively to Donald's proposition, which is that it's very difficult for us to read Plato or Aristotle without the filters of Augustine and Aquinas standing between us and them.
Yeah.
And most of the summaries of Plato and Aquinas, as far as are they idealists, are they material, what are they in an abstract sense, almost all of those summaries suffer from the same flaw, that they aren't actually reading Plato or Aristotle. What they're actually reading is a modernist's attempt to understand them as filtered through, Aquinas and Augustine. So it makes it hard to answer your question. I'm actually, this year is when I'm doing my deep dive on Plato, like I said earlier this year, and I've been this week lining up my bibliography of books that I'm going to work my way through, including some that Donald's recommended. So I will be in a better position to, address your question then than I am now. But what I can say is I almost every single time I pick up a piece of ancient Greek literature, whether it's philosophy or poetry or what have you, and I read the translations in English because that's that's the only language I'm fluent in that's relevant here. If I then put the Greek side by side with the English and I scan the Greek, because I can at least sound it out, I start spotting words that I know. So I've learned some key terms like I've been trying to share in these seminars. And it's patently obvious in case after case that those key terms are being mistranslated by the English translators because they're insisting on turning them into words that we have in English based on the assumption that there's nothing you can say in ancient Greek that you can't say equally smoothly in English, which is sort of it's the Achilles heel of modern translators, this faith. So the result is, even if there weren't any other form of distortion, the translator themselves, when they translate into English, apply massive distortions to the text. You know, what we found,
Is German less distorted? I mean, because we always think of the Germans as somehow a bit more nuanced, or I mean, like, how does that work? I mean, are
they've
we
still got some
required
terms we've
to know
lost.
German? And not only German, but let's say 18th century and 19th century German? I mean,
Yeah, they've still got some terms that we've lost, right? I mean, Hegel can talk about, Begriff and Verstand and Vernunft, and we can't. We don't have those words. In fact, Zeitgeist, we had to borrow it. It's just like, what hope would we have? It's one of the most important topics in this whole area, and it's just absolutely missing from English. So I wouldn't say that in German you're getting a completely accurate rendition of the Greek, but I'd say that in English you're getting a much, much less accurate rendition of the Greek. And by less accurate, I mean the English seems to make sense and say something, and we believe that it's authentic when in fact its errors are sort of hidden underneath this false second sense.
well, let's get back to a question I asked earlier. Like, is that because English tries to be a little bit more segmented in its language and more precise, and then the position and the preciseness of it loses the interconnectedness to something that's much richer? Is that a basic problem? Because English apparently has many words that breaks, like a much more complex congealing of words into segments, and so there seems to be a lot of plus signs, and it's like you could divide all those ands up, and then you could say, oh, this is much more atomic in a sense. Is that part of the problem with English versus German or French or Greek?
Well, part of it is that the other languages are resisting modernization more than English does. English embraces modernization. So the distortions implied by the modernist worldview are almost most clearly exemplified in the English language. I mean, look at the French. They're fighting against change in the language because they're seeing the effect that English, and especially English, has upon other languages. But they fight to maintain the structure of their language, and we mock them for it. Spain does the same thing. Spanish does the same thing. German does the same thing. They all sort of have this sense that their languages, that the historical freight of their language is important and worthy of preservation. Whereas in English, we think history doesn't exist. Only practical things exist. History's irrelevant. It's maybe a hobby for weekends for nerds who are into that sort of thing. But what we want to know about is money and power. We want to know about cars and sex. We're always talking about the current stuff and how do we get it. And it's why even where we have terms like kenning, they fade into obsolescence because we stop using them because we're not.
So in a way, you're almost saying that language, the particularization of language, is what made it possible for America to be so supreme in capitalism. because it's structured in such a way that you could mechanically move parts in a way. I mean, it's very interesting. I didn't realize that was
It's one of the contributors. Let's say it takes a perfect storm.
Yeah,
really. I mean, you have to have a lot of ingredients. The fact that we are a bunch of people dumped onto a continent and uprooted from our old traditions helps an enormous amount. There's a lot of reasons, but that language is certainly part of it. I mean, anytime an English speaker opens their mouth and tries to speak about philosophical subjects, as Kenneth Smith says, they hand themselves to you. If you know what to look for and listen for, you can hear all of their delusions and ideologies and justifications just pouring out of their mouth without them ever realizing that's what they're doing. So the way that we blur together all the different kinds of thinking as the same, the way we just sort of assume there's only a single human nature and it's infinitely malleable and can become anything, this whole tabula rasa idea, there's all this stuff, it just pours out of us, revealing the nihilism that's sort of at the heart of the modernist worldview. So it's interesting stuff. I come back to the language just because this is a text. You know, if we were out there doing political organizing, I might point to something other than words, you know, and say, "Look, behold our behavior," right? But anyway, we'll come back to it.
Well,
I
let's
think,
hear from Donald because
yeah,
he's
let's hear from
anxious to
Donald.
say something.
Tell us what's on your mind, Donald.
Little as possible. Uh, the two issues here. One, since Phil is such a reader of Heidegger, when Heidegger discussed a lot, most of what of Heidegger I read was his discussions of the Greeks. And he broke the Greek words down into their prefixes, suffixes, their root, and then matched those up one to one with German, which builds words the same way that Greek did. And you got a new coinage, a neologism. And you read enough Heidegger, you begin to think, whoa, gosh, these are perfectly ordinary words, but they're not. They're words. But it works very well. In English, one of the translators that kind of changed a lot of my thinking was one called, his name is, he publishes under R.E. Allen, Reginald Allen. And in most of his translations, he adopts a strategy. One, he'll have a discussion of, in this dialogue, there are the following key philosophical terms. And he'll talk about them. And then he'll say, and for the purpose of this translation, I am always and only going to translate this Greek word into this English word. And he will have explained what he thought the Greek word meant. So you don't get those flowery, literate, he's killing poetry in Plato for sure, but he's making it possible for you to read it philosophically by restricting his translation. I don't know if he ever translated everything. I have many dialogues that he's translated, and I think other translators may have adopted that. But, you know, when I studied Plato in school, we had that big, thick, all-in-one, the complete Plato, whatever. And I remember a professor in the class saying that, they first did the translation, and then they polished the English until it was no longer Platonic. Sort of, they wanted it to read well in English and to capture the beauty of Plato's language. But you can't, it's exactly the kinds of things, of what are we talking about when we say courage or wisdom or temperance, or what term has been. And so Allen's text, he usually has good introductions that don't say things like, well, this dialogue shows it's very difficult to define the virtue A, or something like that. And instead discusses the meanings in Greek of the key terms in the dialogue and what's being discussed, and then how he's going to translate those to English. And that's very helpful. Even now, his translations might be somewhat dated, but yeah, I have lots of his books. For all I know, he's dead. I don't know. So many people are. And as I get older, it happens to more and more. But and the other is always, you know, you have to read the Peloponnesian Wars before you can read Plato, because almost all those people show up. All the characters are actually real people, and they show up in Thucydides. And I might say there's another thing that's kind of that I thought's important is Thucydides died before he finished writing, completing the war. He ends in like 404. But Xenophon, a friend of Socrates, and not philosophical. It's like a whole different view of Socrates. He sees that Socrates is a good man, does the right thing, but it's not the. He doesn't see the. He doesn't. You know how Plato. A lot of things I think from reading Xenophon, you would say, well, you know, Socrates really said that because Xenophon says he said it too. But Plato goes on and finds layer after layer of meaning, you know, and unpacks these things to produce, you know, a metaphysics and ethics and an epistemology and all that. And Xenophon said, and Socrates was a good man, and I agree with what he said. You know, it's, you know, there's not that sort of elaboration or something. Although I think you should read, and of course Xenophon wrote a set of kind of Socratic dialogues. And they're kind of interesting to read and compare them with Plato, because you can see it's Socrates in both dialogues, but one is by a poet with incredible philosophical sophistication, and one is by a farmer or a rancher, fought in the army, knew how to run his life, fought in the war, went and attacked Persia and some other things in the Anabasis, but very different. You should read them both. I mean, but that's thing. But anyway, I like what Heidegger did, and I like what Allen did, and I don't know that Allen's familiar with Heidegger or anything. His stuff is not as sophisticated, but I like that. And some modern translations just put the Greek in parentheses, or they put the Greek in the text, inline in the text, and then there's some glossary or something that has a paragraph or something that describes them. And I like those. Of course, they make they make it harder to read, Plato harder to read, but maybe make it easier to understand his meaning. Like I think some people said about Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, this book would have been a lot shorter if it wasn't so short. That is, they cut out all the examples and stuff, you know, and made it incomprehensible. but anyway, read Plato at your own peril. You know, of course I like it, but you know, my views on Plato are not found elsewhere, you know. And I'll say Karl Lovitz's book is very good, and I think I paid 95 cents for my copy when I was in school when we studied 19th century European philosophy. but it's good to see that it's free now, because enough.
Thank you, Donald. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Reginald E. Allen. I haven't read any of his work yet. And now that I'm embarking on Plato, I mean, you know, from the way I go about these seminars, I'm going to be very interested in what you're describing as Alan's approach to pulling apart the language and looking to say, what is he really saying here? I mean, not what do we imagine he's saying, but what is he actually trying to say? That's exactly the kind of thing I want to supplement my Plato reading. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know that he gives particularly insightful interpretations or preface or summary to the dialogues as to what philosophically they meant. But I think Alan pays a lot of attention to the Greek, and his translations become kind of literal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I think that trend continues in more modern translators. I know, like I very much for like Thucydides. Of course, now it dates me because it's an old book, but when I read it, it was a new book. It's the landmark Thucydides, which has maps and annotations and stuff, so you can learn the geography and, and where the cities are and where the passes and the mountains are and how things happened, you know. And it's not the sort of thing that occurs in some older translations, which just translate it and leave it largely unexplained. But then again, they were probably done for British schoolboys that were having to take classical geography and they were picking up all the stuff you need to understand the text from some other place. You know, they had classical ancient history and ancient geography and stuff as classes. They didn't need to pack them all into the one text.
Right. Well, now I got to pick up the landmark Thucydides because I don't have that either. So,
well, it's not the text that's so changed.
The maps.
It's the maps.
Yeah.
It's the maps and the constant reminder of who this guy is. You know, a name pops up and it's like, oh, and we saw him back in book 1 and whatever. You know, it's the metadata.
Yes. Which we need in order to read these things. So I just threw it. I'm going to call on Stephen in a moment, but I just threw into the text one of the parts of Cornford's book, Thucydides Myth Historicus, that leaped out at me was right in the preface. I mean, I finished it and I've gone back and started taking extra notes out of it, but the preface right at the beginning slapped me on the first read through, because I'm thinking about last week where Fei Wu Ling is doubting that there's such a thing as a worldview and thinks that we can see the world the way it actually is. And Cornford here, writing back in, what is this, 1908 or something, gives a really clear explanation of the power of a worldview when he says, you know, Thucydides made it his goal to write an unadorned history of what actually happened. And in doing so, he was breaking with tradition and basically inventing the concept of history for the Greeks for the first time, trying to say, well, what if I didn't just pass along gossip the way everybody else has always done? What if I didn't just mold and bend this thing to fit my preconceptions? What if I just said, I'm gonna write about things I saw and I was involved in, or I'm gonna interview the people who were there and saw it and write about what they did. And then on the other hand, I'm just gonna write down the speeches as best I can based on the arguments that they made or would have made at that moment. And hopefully by doing that, I'll remove all the cruft, you know, that makes it a fiction when so many other people write history. And maybe he says I could do such a good job of paring away the bullshit that what you're left with in this history that I'm writing is something that future generations will be able to learn about this war by reading it. It won't just be full of opinion and stuff. And Cornford's argument is, first of all, that is a higher standard of objectivity than anybody in the Greek world had ever done before, you know, in an attempt to explain how things literally are. Second of all, it's better than almost any modern people write history because everybody's got their thumb on the scale trying to push their, you know, favorite ideology or political party. But the most important thing to Cornford and what made him write the entire book is the discovery that even somebody so committed to objectivity nevertheless accidentally imposed a story upon the history. And this book is about what was that story and how did he do it. And he says, what he's saying right here in the preface is the reason that that happens is because of the unexamined parts, the taken for granted parts of being an Athenian. Athenians, share an age and they share a polis, and that means that they share an outlook. So you can't just drop a bunch of facts in there. That's impossible. You're writing a book, it comes in a sequence. So the question is, where does that sequence come from? And Thucydides thought he could be objective by saying, well, the sequence is going to be the order that things actually happened. But that's still not clear enough. It still doesn't give you the truth. It still leaves too much room to impose what Cornford says is a worldview. And that's why he's decided to give Thucydides the epithet Mythhistoricus, Thucydides Mythhistoricus, because he's trying to be historical, but at the same time, he's been marinating all his life in a mythos, a worldview. And that comes through in the way that he tells this story, despite applying every power and bit of virtue he's got to try to be scrupulously objective. So, I thought it was, I didn't do nearly as succinct a job last week in answering Fei Wu Ling as Cornford did here in this text in explaining what is a worldview and how does it act upon you. I think this is, I wish I'd had this ready and I could have just trotted it out for her, because Cornford obviously spent a lot of time crafting this text, and it sings. Before I call on Stephen, I'm going to call on Donald again, because I have a feeling his hand is up to add something to what he was already saying. So come off mute and tell us what it is, and then we'll move on to what Stephen has in mind.
Now you've thrown me totally off track.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, it couldn't have been. No. In Thucydides, there's all these speeches, and a great deal is made today of how he must have just largely made these things up. But you were while you were in a civilization that has writing, people didn't have ways to just write things down. And plus, most of these educated people, of which I would think Thucydides, probably could recite Homer from memory. Their powers of remembering oral things probably, I have no proof, but I have read things of other oral cultures done by anthropologists where they say tremendous memory ability, because that's the only way to carry information. And so these things that Thucydides gets criticized by some moderns are probably just laziness on the part of moderns. I mean, I've never tried to memorize something of that length. I think I topped out at the Gettysburg Address or something in school. But yeah, it's a different culture, and very oral. And I think the memory associated with it being that way would have been far exceeding what we typically find today. I mean, you do find it in something like, I've seen on television, poets can often recite extremely long material that they've written. It's true. Songwriters can often still sing the lyrics and play the melody for every song they've ever written. So it's not inconceivable to me that Thucydides, for those things he heard, or for things he talked to people who had been present and heard the speech, didn't get a fairer representation of what was actually said than we typically think. Enough said.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And part of it as well is that these speeches were incredibly important to the Greeks because they were all debating the merits of the sides, the Peloponnesian side versus the Athenian Delian League side, and the debate took the case of, it partially took the form of saying, do these arguments hold water? Is this a valid reason for this side or that side to take the action that they took? And so they're all turning over, if you will, the oral text, in conversation over and over, thinking about whether it makes sense. It's interesting these days. I mean, frankly, even just my generation versus 2 generations ago, the powers of memory of people 2 generations ago who were educated through that method of, you must memorize speeches, you must memorize poems, you have to be able to stand at the front of the class and recite them. This wasn't something that my generation did much of. I'm utterly dependent on my apparatus of my library and my computers and Google and all those other things to help me find my way around. And granted, at this point, I've been doing the philosophy so long, I can recite a lot of Heraclitus and a certain amount of Hegel, but you move much outside of the areas that I've rehearsed so much, and I can't do it the way that I imagine an ancient Celt could have. Just because they had to carry it all around their heads. I'm put in mind of the way that in the Isle of Man around the year 1000, it's maybe the second oldest kind of participatory democracy in the world. I think Iceland has them beat, but like barely by a few years. It's a matter of debate between the two. And in the Isle of Man, every year everybody gathers together in one village where there's a hill, and somebody gets up on the hill and they recite the entire law code of the Isle of Man, including whatever's new this year, what new legislation has been proposed. And they do that so that if they're trying to be corrupt and lay out, any laws that would be to their advantage, the Isle of Man can lynch them. The lawgivers are held accountable physically by, there's the guy, and here's what he's claiming. Should we let him live? Do we want to feel like following this law or not? But part of it is that the audience remembers an enormous amount of the law code that they've been hearing every single year at this annual event. And so if somebody tries to change something or slip something in, there's an audience of the entire population that could go, no, 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 no. That was the corrective. So cultures like that, they exercise their memory in ways that we can only dream of. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yes, well, this is not dealing with specifically what we've been dealing with at the moment, but broadly what we are dealing with here. Now, I was sitting at a dinner with a guy who's sort of bright. We're talking about the situation with, Russia. And of course, he was telling me that we are in the West a democracy and Russia isn't. So the cure-all for everything is making places into a democracy, you see. If you spread the beautiful religion of liberal democracy, and inclusion, we've updated the free proclamations of the French Revolution. Only good can result. Now, of course, if we look at the claims of the Greeks, democracy can devolve into a tyranny, and they explain why. And later on, we see the fall of the Roman Republic, which took about a century. And it was just the classic steps of the death of a republic or the death of democracy. What had been proclaimed by Plato in his observations of what was happening in the Greek sphere just plays itself out again with the fall of the Roman Republic. And of course, the big point is that the elect vote themselves material advantages along with others. Once they got the vote is valuable. It can be sold to what do you call them again? Those sort of oligarchs which appear in a democracy. He'll get a following, promising his followers a nice chunk of the state budget or something like that, and so eventually a conflict arises. But this is our public today. Our public is taught democracy is virtuous, and you put the Alka-Seltzer in the water and let it fizz for a while, and only good can result from it. Now, I always noticed in Rudolf Steiner, he proclaimed a system which demonstrates my foolishness that in almost 50 years I never woke up. He had simply imitated the tale. Of course, Steiner copied that and emphasized balance. Yes, you can have too much of a good thing because nothing is good of itself. It's the nature of balance. But we're taught a very monist sort of materialist outlook. There is the good stuff and the bad stuff. And if you avoid the bad stuff and pile on the good stuff, only good can result. The more good stuff, the better. Education is good. Therefore, the more education, the better. If we keep on keep people in school to about 72, that can only result in goodness because education is good. But this is just completely overthrowing the principle of the Tao, the idea of balance, that you can have too much of one thing and not enough of another.
Right.
And it's chucks things out of balance. But here we have it. The modern golden calf is democracy, liberal democracy. We spread it and only goodness can result. And there's a lot of money makers, and I must admit democracy is very successful when it comes to money making. There's generally a good track record. There's a lot of people rubbing their hands at the hope that liberal democracy should be spread all over the world so their carpetbaggers can come in and rip off any culture they like. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, one of the most unsettling for an American or any modernist pro-democratic person, one of the most unsettling passages in Thucydides' Myth Historicus by Cornford is where he discusses how the constitutional reforms of Solon extended the franchise to the Banausoi. He wanted to turn, since Athens had very few natural resources of its own, he wanted to turn Athens into the premier trade city and crafts city. And that was why he didn't want to give up the funds of the Delian League after the Persian War. He was using that money to pay the craftsmen to work on the Acropolis. So all of that beautiful stuff that we go and admire now, that was the blood, sweat, and tears of other polises that were not allowed to leave the Delian League. Athens kept them in by force so that they could put all these craftsmen on the dole. And then conversely, where did all the great marble and the wood and all the other things come from? Well, they were being traded for by the trade fleet that was at the Piraeus as well. And this idea that if democracy is good, then more democracy is better runs aground on the pretty much conclusive evidence, although it's really easy to overlook, and Thucydides himself overlooked it, the fairly conclusive evidence that once the franchise had been extended to the Banausoi in the Piraeus, they basically took over Athenian politics and pushed Athens into the war because they wanted to conquer Megara in order to get a port on the west side of the Greek peninsula, and then from there launch the expedition to Sicily and conquer Sicily and use that as, their idea was first Megara, then Sicily, and then they wanted to take Carthage. That was their plan. And their plan was because that was money. They wanted all the money for them, right? What could be better? So they voted, and they used their money and their influence to sway Athenian politics and basically dragged Athens into a devastating war that helped lead to the downfall of the Hellenic Age. Yay, democracy. And of course, in modernity, democracy is one of those things that you're talking about, Stephen. It's like if a little is good, then a lot is better, and more is better. And the most, all of it must be the best thing of all. And the idea that if you hand power to parasites, con artists, predators, vampires, cannibals, people who want to destroy everybody around them for their own advantage, if you hand them power and expect them to suddenly behave in a virtuous fashion just because you have warm, fuzzy feelings about the political system or the ideology, you're in for the same kind of disappointment that Athens had when after Solon handed all this power into the hands of the Banausoi, and then they did what Banausoi are characterologically structured to do, which is, screw up everything in order to maximize their short-term return on investment, which is the Peloponnesian War, And of course, in the end, it was bad for the Banausoi too, but they're not able to think outside of their appetites and plans. That's what makes them Banausoi. And expecting them to do so just because we ideologically believe that if you hand the franchise to someone, they automatically become enlightened. This is, well, so what we have here, takes us back to the opening sentence. I'm going to call on Zelig in just a second, and I've got a transition for you, Zelig. So this takes us back to this opening sentence of paragraph 12. This demanding a fit of form to matter, because they could see all throughout the natural world these astonishing harmonies of the fits of predator populations to prey populations, the fit of the climate of Greece to the kinds of plants that grew in Greece. I mean, everything in nature had this astonishing level of fit that was so far beyond the fit of anything that people created that to them it was patently obvious that people have a problem. Our capacity to make bad things that fall apart is boundless. Yes, at times we can make things that fit well, but hardly ever by accident. Usually only if we just dedicate ourselves to the problem, to overcoming the problem of how easy it is for us to misfit, the form and matter to each other. So, Kenneth Smith uses the example of living creatures, then he uses the example of the fit of organs to their tasks. And I swear when I read this week in preparation for today's seminar, I thought of Zelig, because Zelig often talks about why can't we organize human society, similarly to how biological metabolism works, make sure that all the basic metabolic functions of society are functioning correctly, like a creature, like a biological system. And here's Kenneth Smith using that as an example of how the Greeks saw the world, and basically, specifically, how the Greeks imagined human society needed to be structured to fit the actual diversity of character types that we find in human beings. If this is the actual matter of which human beings are constructed, then it's our duty to construct our societies in ways that are harmonious with that will allow people to express their teleology in ways that lead to phronesis and not to self-destruction. So Zelig, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. That was my setup for you. Oh, or did you step away? Got to find your mute button. I think he stepped away. I'll come back to him. I think he stepped away. So we'll carry on for now. So let's go on to the next sentence. For every natural type of personality, there should be a domain of social or economic function. A correspondence, right? Harmony. And indeed, the genius of Greek civilization was most profoundly expressed by an organic disposition of social order that is modally so interpreted, part into whole, that moderns have accepted it as if it were nature itself, at the same time that our mutated sense of personality has corrupted the rationale and harmony of that order. So this is one of his longer sentences, and it can be a little difficult to pick apart, but he's basically just trying to say what we said a moment ago, that the Greeks kind of deliberately structured their society to try to fit what they saw as being the different character types that were people, where each one had a function to go with it. Now, the meaning of this sentence, which is a little hard to pick apart, is all laid out in paragraph 13, which is his restatement of Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. So let's drop paragraph 13 in here. We might have to do it in two pieces. Let's see. Oh, yep, too long. We do it in two pieces. Oh, no, I'm going to do it in three pieces because there are three parts of society. So first, this part. like so. And then this part, like so. And then finally this part, like so. So this is his summary in one paragraph of Hannah Arendt's entire book, The Human Condition. And really it more specifically corresponds to the three central largest sections: the section on labor, animal laborans, which is the realm of the oikos, the section on work, homo faber, which is the realm of the agora, and then finally the section on action, or the realm of the aristos, which is the res publica, where we govern, where aristoi are to govern. So I'm going to give us a couple of links here for the human condition. And I remember repeatedly the way that he has said that for him, Hannah Arendt was a revelation, both in what she said and in what she didn't say, that she pointed the way to the most important things and went halfway there and then didn't go far enough, didn't take it to the sort of radical implications. She always held back from following. She'd lay out this thing that pointed inexorably towards a strong conclusion, and then she wouldn't state the conclusion. And part of it is that the way that she writes in her books and her essays, she writes like a modern who is basically in favor of modern institutions and is just pointing out a few cautions and things that we should be worried about. But then she lays out a book like this that describes a world utterly different from the modern world. And the implication between this and her critiques of modernity is that there's something wrong with the modern world and we really ought to change. But she never says we really ought to change. She holds back from that. She doesn't do what Nietzsche or Marx or any number of other writers would do. And, who knows why? I mean, I haven't read enough of her material to work out why she holds back that way, but she does. I've seen it for myself. He's right. I've read her books too. She does. She holds back. But in this, we're sort of seeing this concept that if there are three fundamental character types corresponding to what for the mature adult, fully actualized Homo sapiens would be three stages of cognitive development, right? Then there are correspondingly three parts of the economy or the social, political, economic structure in which when you're at a given stage, you can be yourself and express yourself fully and thrive in that domain. And if you develop further into the next stage of development of your cognitive development, then you can migrate and graduate and move outwards into the next stage, the next sector of society, where as you've gained new levels of self-control and self-understanding, where you've gained new faculties and proficiencies, you can then apply them and express your new self in this new arena and be true to who you are and what you want to do without hurting yourself or others. And so this is what we do in theory, not in practice, but this is in theory what we do with the concept of childhood, right? We don't let little kids drive cars. We don't give little kids the red button and say, now don't push the red button or you'll kill us all, right? Because what if they throw a tantrum? The little kids might throw a tantrum and then that's the end of the world. And so we know it would be deeply stupid to hand the red button to someone who's too immature. I mean, we sort of know. When it comes to age, we recognize it. When it comes to adulthood and the flaws of character, we sort of don't know it at all. we hand the red button to whoever gets elected, and we just cross our fingers and say, well, the system has spoken, and I guess everything's going to be great now. But we sort of recognize the principle that people have differing levels of capacity and maturity, and that society should be structured in such a way that when you don't know enough not to put your hand on a hot stove, we keep you out of the kitchen unless you're supervised so that you won't do it. Because we know you might reach for it and somebody needs to grab your hand and pull it back. Say, don't do that. You're going to cause damage that you can never undo if you're allowed to freely express yourself in an arena that you're unprepared for. The same is true in traditional Okinawan martial arts. We start with karate, not kobudo, We start without weapons. We start barehanded and try to learn how not to hit ourselves or others. We try to learn how to control our temper. We try to learn how not to be afraid and violent, and how to get ourselves in shape. And only then do we graduate to using weapons. And when we start with weapons, we start with blunt wooden weapons, like the staff. It's not that you can't hurt somebody with a staff. You really can, but there's significant limitations to how much you can hurt somebody. Whereas the razor sharp, scythes are saved for way down into the black belts. You gotta be way down the road before we hand you one of those things, because you can be the most responsible person in the world, but still, if you make a mistake, you accidentally lop off one of your own fingers. And everybody knows you have to graduate what are the tools that are in your hands to titrate them to match what is your capacity and level of control and proficiency. This is well known in the crafts. This is well known in carpentry, in plumbing, in electrical work, in all of the places where the rubber hits the road. We know this is how you're supposed to do things. Except in modernity, we say that's not true of voting or running for political office. I mean, you've looked at the US Constitution, right? I mean, the requirements to be president, I think there's 2 of them. You actually have to be born in America. You have to be, maybe 3. You have to be born a certain age, and I think not a felony or something. But it's hardly anything. It's hardly anything. You can believe that the world is evil, and that the moment you become president, your job is to push the button and exterminate everybody, to bring on Armageddon, to force Jesus to come back and take us all to heaven. You can believe it. You can say it. You can write books about it. You can spend your whole life devoted to the destruction of the world demonstrably. And you can say, what I'm going to do if you elect me president is destroy the world. And the Constitution thinks, well, that's fine. Let him be president. Sure, destroy everything. Why not? That's sort of the level that we come to about titrating political power to match character. We're completely clueless, right? Being age 35 is absolutely no guarantee of, maturity. Plenty of people become felons without ever doing a violent thing in their life, and plenty of people are violent and dangerous without ever getting convicted of a felon. So that's a mismatch, and all of these things. It's like we basically have no protections at all for the greatest powers that are available to us. Officially, that's the system. What would the Greeks think of that? Well, what they would think of it is they'd say, well, Jesus Christ, I mean, we don't even let Duloy out of the house barely. But, you'll elect them president. What's with you? What's wrong? Specifically, what's wrong with you would be the ancient perspective looking at us. Now, of course, we could look at them and say, what's wrong with you about any number of other things that are obvious to us and not to them. But the idea that there are these blind spots that we take for granted that are, if you examine the issues and do justice to them as best you can, it becomes patently obvious that we're all operating under bad assumptions. There are things like that we just don't normally think about, in the same way Thucydides didn't think about his acculturation as an Athenian that led him to structure the story of the Peloponnesian War the way that he did, which Cornford's talking about in that book. This is the worldview in action, right? What do we see? What do we not see? What are we aware of? What are we not aware of? What are we interested in? What are we not interested in? And how does all of that intersect our ability to focus on what's healthy and good for us and society? These are the issues that Kenneth Smith's writing about in this chapter. Sally, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, how's it going? I was gonna pop up earlier, but my dogs got away. So I had to get them real quick. Yeah, I was gonna answer. I was gonna connect it with what Phil was asking earlier. About how do you know that Plato's being translated, correctly? And I came up to the same question when I was trying to study the New Testament or the Bible, and I basically went to self-teach myself Koine Greek, and I was able to pick up that. So, like, I just posted a picture of like the comparisons of the Bibles as to which ones are literal, which ones are the paraphrase. And what I noticed is that when it comes to Greek Platonic dialogues, is the same thing. When I went to go study Plato to understand certain concepts that you find in the New Testament, the translation is the same thing. You have paraphrases of Plato, and then you have word for word. And so it's basically the same thing. Depending on what kind of translation you want, if it's a one-to-one, like the Mental dialogue it's one of the most difficult to translate from what I understand because of the different neologisms that Plato has. And I recognize they're like, oh, I'm gonna have to study the language myself if I'm actually want to have a knowledge of what is being taught by the author. And the same thing I came up with Kant. Kant, according to what the translator says, that he's extremely difficult to translate because his German is so unique that you don't find him anywhere else in German literature writing and thinking like he does. And so many of us have a notion of categories from a translation point of view. Um, and so that's what I have to say in terms of, like you compare it to your Bible, same thing. I think the closest that one that you can get to word for word from the Greek translation, the Koine, would be NASB, I would say. There's some other ones, but in general, that's kind of like the closest that you'll get to the original, besides, studying Koine Greek for yourself. Um, and what we were talking about right now about the view, the way that this Greek defines the scheme, that's something that I've thought before. How come we just don't organize ourselves around our physical organs? And it would make a lot of sense, right? If you just make up policies that promote the benefit of the human organs, the proper function of the heart, our limbs, our brain, we would probably live in a better society. But I think in modernity, we have what the you might call it the trifecta of Nietzsche, Marx, Freud, and Weber, that there's no longer any belief that anybody can get out of the worldview that we're in. Whereas in the ancient times, there was a belief that that there was a transcendent figure that can actually tell you how it is outside of what your phenomenology, right? Your experience, where, for example, at least in the ancient Jewish perspective, that God revealed himself to you and would tell you what it was truly like. And in modernity, at certain points, there was these gods that lived in Mount Olympus, or witchcraft, or magic, or whatever you wanted to call your charismata, allowed you to have information that was detached from your worldview. Because the ancients knew that. The ancients, like you're saying, Rick, they were not dumb people. They knew that what they were living and experiencing, it was limited to their worldview, at least the Aristoi. They knew that their life experiences were their life experiences, and there was other things that had different experiences besides the ones they were having. But they believed that there was this transcendental being or entity like Plato, right? The world of ideas. In this world, you're never going to see a perfect circle, but there is a perfect world where there is a perfect circle, where it doesn't have any ragged edges or anything else, perfect straight line with no pure length, going around in a perfect pie. But we in modernity no longer believe in world of ideas. We no longer believe that figures like Jesus can actually come from the ultimate reality to tell us how reality truly is, and therefore put our lives in order according to that ultimate nature that we can't see, but only by faith. And I think in modernity, because of what Nietzsche said, because of what Marx and Freud said, because of Weber, the way that he changed the scientific method to study, where it's like, yeah, we're going to study this case, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do because we really don't know. There is really no charisma. There's just manipulation for you to be organized politically so that you can do the bidding of Hitler. So you can do the bidding of Donald Trump. And he's just manipulating you, not because he wants you to organize according to ultimate reality, but to his reality. And you're going to come out on the losing end. So that I forgot who said it, but we're living under the age of the age of suspicion, where no one can get out of the Geist. There is no ex deus machina. And so I think that's just why we can't really organize ourselves as such a thing as like, you know what, let's just create policies to promote the health benefit of the human organism, and anything that is proven to benefit it after long studies should be promoted, and anything after long studies that doesn't promote it should be discarded. And then you have somebody that says, oh, you're just trying to give us the jab in COVID. And you're like, I'm not touching that. I'm gonna back away from that discussion. And because we're living under such an age of suspicion that we're just being manipulated for someone else's benefit. And that's what it doesn't allow us to be Greek in that sense. That's what comes to my mind when I look at the way Greeks organize themselves, because they consider themselves to be ordering themselves to ultimate reality, that it was possible to get through, whether it was Plato's view of the world or Aristotle's view of the world, about ideas meeting with matter. So I think that's what we're lacking. We don't have that anymore.
Thank you, Zelig. This, what you're bringing up is of course directly relevant to this, and it's potent. One of the things that I read this week in preparation for this session was I read some discussion about the other work called The Constitution of the Athenians, not Aristotle's, but the pseudo-Xenophon one, that we don't know exactly who wrote it. We used to think Xenophon wrote it, but we're pretty sure he didn't. And now they're just, I forget who it is that coined the term the old oligarch for whoever it was that wrote. Oh, Gilbert Murray coined that term, the old oligarch, for whoever it was that wrote it. And I'm going to do a little quote out of this Wikipedia article right here. The author discusses three features he considered characteristic of the Athenian democratic system. These were that, first, the system benefited the common people. Second, that it allowed social vices to be common, which we're going to come back to in a moment. And third, that it was not interested in the pursuit of eunomia, or good order. And this is just shared in the Wikipedia article, like, okay, whatever, these are some facts. Because, Wikipedia articles are written, what's defensible that somebody can't delete off of there because you can prove that that was actually part of what was stated. But what does it mean that he says these three things? I mean, I take us back to Aristotle's work on politics and on the Athenian constitution, where he discusses the 6 forms of government, which is really 3 forms, each of which has its good form and its bad form. And in the case of democracy, the good form is one in which the people are concerned with eunomia, good order. They have shared virtues, they understand shared principles, and their focus is on doing what basically, and it's hard to say in English, but I mean, to use the Greek, they're interested in phronesis, right? In which the character of the people is sophrosune, that they are oriented towards what is healthy for themselves, each other, and the society as a whole. And this critic, the old oligarch who wrote his document called The Constitution of the Athenians, is basically saying that Athens is being governed by the bad form of democracy. When you put it together with the Aristotle, it's patently obvious what he's saying. He's saying, yes, Aristotle described 2 democracies, a good one and a bad one, and the Athenian one is the bad one. Right? It's not, people are not focused on virtue, they're focused on vice. And that orientation means that you don't have the pursuit of phronesis, you have the pursuit of self-destruction. And when you put this together with Cornford's critique of what Thucydides is saying about Athens during the Peloponnesian War, it's manifestly proven by the way that the Banausoi were able to get control politically as a faction and drive Athens and the entire Greek world into self-destruction through the pursuit of, basically they wanted to make enormous amounts of money by conquering Megara, then Sicily, then Carthage. And they wrecked everything in order to try to get that for themselves. And that bears out what the author of the Constitution of the Athenians is saying. That's the evidence. But all of this is based on an understanding of the world and human nature and the relationship between the individual and the group that moderns don't have, but that the ancients take for granted. And we now on these, we're on week 99 now. We can trace the connections and see that the meaning is right there in these statements. You start with ethos anthropoi daimon from Heraclitus, this idea that human character, each person's character is like a daimon, like a little god that rules over them. And that cultivating that character is the most important thing if you want to change your fate to be better than it otherwise would be. That your teleology, the direction of your life, yes, there's going to be contingency, but the agency part of it is your agency through your teleology is going to be driving you always in the direction of expressing your inner character. And so this falls under, there's a set of pairs that I want to make here. That term eunomia needs to be underscored here. You, of course, is good as a prefix. and nomia is referring to the nomos. Nomos is the laws of the people. The laws of the polis. How do we live? There is a statement, I don't think it's in Thales, but it's in one of the ancient Greeks, that says the phusis is to the cosmos as the psyche is to the somos. So let me put these terms down. Psyche and somos. That's basically your soul and your body, right? But not the Christian idea of soul and body, and not the modern idea of soul and body, the ancient Greek concept of soul and body. And this goes back to something that Donald and Phil and others were talking about earlier on this call. What did the Greeks think? You know, the Christians think that the soul is the real part of you and the body is just clay and dust. But the Homeric Greeks believe the opposite. They believe the body is the real you. And the psyche is just the life force that you inhale when you're born and that you exhale upon your death. They define the psyche not as the real part that's important and will live for all eternity. They define the psyche as the psyche is the part of you that when you exhale your last breath, the corpse that's left is differentiated from the person who was alive a moment before. The difference between being alive and dead is your psyche. But it isn't anything else. It's not your true self. It's not your eternal self. It doesn't get rewarded. It doesn't get punished. Their concept of Hades had nothing in common with heaven or hell. It was a completely alien concept. It was just that your body can't live if you can't breathe. When you stop breathing, you stop living. So what is gone when you're a corpse? Well, your personality is gone. Your character is gone. The things you knew, the things you loved, all of that's gone, right? When you become a corpse. They saw all of that as being part of psyche. And therefore, your ethos, your character, is part of your psyche. Ethos anthropoi daimon is partially anatomizing the psyche by saying part of what makes up your soul, part of what you lose when you die, is the part that determines your teleology, the part that has your inner nature, your character, that makes you something other than just a body lying on the ground. So the somos is the body, which is the real you, according to the Greeks, and the psyche is your inner nature or character. So if then it's true that in the same way that psyche is to the somos, phusis is to the cosmos, then they're saying that the universe, all of nature, is like a body, and that its inner nature that makes it behave the way that it does, that, if you will, it has breathed in, is the phusis that Heraclitus writes about so much. This is a concept of nature I didn't have a month ago. I only first ran into this when I was reading Cornford's book on From Religion to Philosophy. He's very clear on this stuff. So after he introduces this notion that phusis is to the cosmos as the psyche is the somos, phusis is the soul of the universe. In other words, it's the character, and it includes the character and the nature and the teleology of the universe. And he then took us back to, I can't remember if it was Empedocles, Anaximander, or Thales. It takes us back to some other quotes where they're saying that the cosmos has a soul of its own, a breath of its own. I think it's the guy who said everything is air. It's the guy who said everything is air. Is that Anaximenes? It's Anaximenes. And that is always explained as one of those, it's those literal-minded Greeks who all think that the universe is only made of one substance. Thales thinks it's all water. Heraclitus thinks it's all fire. And Anaximenes thinks it's all air. And of course, we are much wiser than they are, and we know how silly it is to think that everything is only one thing. But I encourage you to reinterpret the idea that everything is made of air from the concept that psyche, the soul, was seen as a breath, as an air, and that it contained the logic and character of the cosmos. The logos is the expression of phusis, in the same way that your ethos is an expression of your character. So in a sense, Anaximenes is saying the important thing about the cosmos is its inner nature. right? The intelligence of the cosmos, the behavior of the cosmos, the teleology of the cosmos, the reason it does some things and not others, the reason an apple falls down and not up. All of the laws of nature, all of this flowing and becoming and its rules, Anaximenes is saying that is the important part of nature. That's a completely different statement from everything is made out of atmosphere, which is what we assume he meant. But we can't understand him in his own terms because for us, the soul and nature and character, if they exist at all, they're not associated with breath or air. So we can't figure out what he's saying. So in the same way, a person could have an unfortunate character and be fated to have a bad life, right? This is what the Greeks call dysdaimonia, right? This is an unfortunate daimon or character. Like in my family, I have a certain amount of dysdaimonia because I inherited alcoholism, right? There's nothing I can do about that other than try to avoid, falling prey to it. It's just there in my character. As long as I don't pick up a glass, I'm fine, But if I ever pick up a glass, I'm going to be in trouble because that's my nature to be that way. I have an unfortunate aspect of my character. So they also believed in eudaimonia, which is, a fortunate daimon or character, right? And by the time you get into the later Alexandrian Hellenistic period, they become obsessed with trying to use astrology to predict who's born with a fortunate character versus an unfortunate character. They become very fatalistic about this stuff. They stop thinking about cultivating your character and trying to do something better with what you inherited. But all of this stuff is hidden in ethos anthropoi daimon, right? Character is fate from Heraclitus. This idea that it really, really matters what the rules of your psyche are, what kind of daimon are we dealing with there? And they believe there were daimons for everything, not just your individual character, but there could be a daimon of a mountain, there could be a daimon of a string, there could be a daimon of a tree. There could be a daimon of the cosmos. In fact, it's implied. If phusis is the cosmos as Suke is the somos, then phusis includes the ethos of the cosmos. What Heraclitus called the logos. The logos is the character / intelligence of the cosmos that determines its teleology. Where is it going? What is it doing? Why does it behave the way that it does? And so the cosmos could have a eudaimonia or a dysdaimonia. But they all believed that nature has a eudaimonia. Likewise, ethos anthropoi daimon is structured in such a way that it not only means a man's character is his guardian divinity, and not only any individual human being's character is his guardian divinity, but Homo sapiens, the character of the species, has its own daimon, its own ethos, its own character. Greek allows you to say these things at multiple levels at the same time, right? And among the groupings of people that can have its own daimon is a polis. A polis can have its own character. This is what Cornford's saying when I did that quote at the beginning about, a man or a nation or a period in history can have its spirit. And that spirit includes an ethos, a character, an inner nature. And that affects the way we see the world and affects the choices that we're capable of making. All of that's bound up together. So if phusis is to cosmos as Suke is to somos, then it is also true that nomos is to polis the same way. What is the law? This is the human equivalent of the logos, but at a human level. What is the law that governs the polis? What is its constitution? What is its culture? What is its nature? What is its character? How is this polis different from other polites in the way that it makes choices about the world? And the nomos includes an ethos of its own. Every polis has its own ethos, its own character. And it could have dysdaimonia, or eudaimonia, an unfortunate polis with a bad daimon, or a fortunate polis with a good daimon, that will help to determine the outcome of things like a war, like the Peloponnesian War. So when the old oligarch says that the Athenian political system allowed social vices to be common, he's saying that the ethos of Athens, the character of its nomos was such that it didn't lead to virtue enough. It led too often to vice. In English, we're inclined to read that as it allowed individual people to be vicious, because we miss the Greek idea that there's a larger whole, and that larger whole has its own psyche, it has its own ethos, its own character, with its own ruling daimon. We miss that. Yeah, I'm Zelig. I'm thinking about you the whole way while I'm talking about this, and everything I was preparing for this day, I was thinking, man, I hope Zelig's on this call today. So when he says that it was not interested in the pursuit of eunomia, eunomia is equivalent to eudaimonia, but at the level of a polis instead of an individual. And so he's not just saying that we're not interested in it, that Athens is not interested in it. He's saying Athens has dysnomia. It suffers from a bad character. It's ruled by a bad daimon that is, and what makes it bad is that it's afflicted with vices that lead it to make foolish decisions. And of course, when you read the Peloponnesian War with all of this in mind, it's patently obvious. Part of the ethos of Athens is the enormous power that the Banausoi have politically over Athens, such that they're able to steer the entire Greek world into a basically self-destructive series of wars that set up their later conquest by, Macedonia. So I wanted to talk about this because, this idea that everything has its character and the relationship of the individual to the group is such that when individuals get together into a group, they're not merely a big circle around a bunch of individuals. It's also an organism on its own, with its own character and its own teleology. And it could be fortunate or unfortunate in its ethos. And that the Greeks have all these pairs of terms: nomos and polis, psyche and somos, phusis and cosmos. And these aren't the only ones. They have a lot more. They're able to do these pairings up through the levels of hierarchy of organization, from the individual to human society, and not ever get lost or confused by using too many synonyms, where the words all vaguely mean something generally in the department. They're specific meanings with specific relationships. They're basically laying out the anatomy and physiology, not just of individual psychology, but of the polis and of a people and even of a time, and of the human species and of the whole cosmos. They're able to lay all of this out with complete clarity because of the nature of the language and because they all grew up with the shared stories, the tragedies, and so forth that made it possible for them to see the implications of these things in a way that no modern can, unless, this is why we've been spending 99 weeks so far working on this section, is we're trying to make sure you can really grasp what an alien worldview it is from the one that we have. We just don't see the world that way at all. The vast stretches of things that are obvious to them are completely invisible to us. We don't, and not only are they invisible, if somebody tried to explain them to us, we would misunderstand it in dozens of different ways, but still unable to get the core point and what they're trying to warn us about. So Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, you've outlined a very complex, let's not say complicated, complex structure. And I was thinking about what the forms were, where does the form lie? Maybe it has its manifestation and a difference in the different levels. I was thinking of, as you were talking through that, the relationship between an ecology, which sounds like zeitgeist, which may sound like the polos, and what Marshall McLuhan calls the medium. The medium is the message, which may be smaller than that, but it's maybe that only relates to human structures. And I was puzzling, what is the relationship between the medium? Because I was thinking specifically of Plato's, I guess, argument with the poets, particularly the playwrights, I suppose. I thought, when you read the Plato's dialogues, it on the one hand, it has the form that's very much like the playwrights, but obviously it has a different message. And I was thinking, maybe the difference is in the medium itself, because he's writing it and it has that relationship. But the medium for the playwrights is that actually is performed. It's actually a living thing rather than a kind of conceptual thing, strictly. Then I begin to think like, and that gets into language. What is the difference between Socrates and Plato? I mean, Socrates doesn't like things to be written. He wants to talk it through. He thinks language is where you actually have a dialogue between people, or maybe groups of people. And in some sense, that's a living substance. And when you write it down, it's a completely different medium. Spoken language is a different medium than a written language. And so does that change it altogether? Like, he's trying to, say what Socrates was trying to get at, and he's got the outline and the ideas, but the difference is, in a way, is like when Socrates is talking, he has to make his points and go through arguments, and people replying back, and he does imitate that. But when you freeze it into a structure, then it changes what language is all about. And so the medium of speaking and the medium of writing might be very, very different in terms of the formal structure of what the thing is. And so was he abusing Socrates when he does that? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't trying to abuse Socrates, but the medium itself transforms the meaning of what is being argued, because I suppose you could correspond with somebody. You write something and somebody replies in written language, and you reply back. There's still a back and forth, but it just seemed different if you were there, at a diner or maybe at a school play yard or whatever, and just talk to the guy. You could see the expressions. You could see him getting, hot-blooded and boiling mad. I mean, I suppose you could add exclamation points or something and try to get a sense of that. So I think that the medium does do that in a way, because I was also thinking, like the form of mechanics, for instance, it like, you would say, oh, that's a train, there's an iron horse, that's a form of the structure of it. But if you think about the whole mechanical structure is one medium, that actually describes a modern society. It's like the structure that's much bigger. The structure of capitalism is all mechanical reproduction of things. And in fact, you could describe the whole universe as the mechanics of Newton and everybody else. So in some sense, you could say, oh, there's a mechanical expression of what the universe is versus maybe how ecological explanation what the universe is. So I just wonder, where is the form? Because when I do art, well, the medium in my case is painting, but I feel pretty sure that I'm dealing with some kind of form, and I change the relationship within the structure itself. And if I want to change it to something else, then I have to do sculpture because it's a different medium. It's what I mean is it's a much more complex web of relationships, even if you go through it in a linear way, So uh so the form of, let's say, modern Cubist paintings is very different from uh romantic paintings, but they're both the medium of painting, and Renaissance painting is, and so forth. It's like, yeah, now I'm getting confused about all those different ways of explaining things, and I'm not sure how to draw the line and how to knit together and how one thing fits into another, because certainly a train is a mechanical device and it forms it within the mechanical structure of a medium, and but where does it unfold into, something more specific? I'm not quite sure where the dividing line is. So I just thought I'd bring that up because and I guess I really want to underscore that once you start writing, and I'm not against writing, by the way. I mean, because it does a lot of good things. Well, for instance, if you change it to the medium of let's say digital writing and converse in internet. I mean, part of the things you lose, you were talking about memory, is like we can begin to lose a certain something. None of us can remember anything because we have it at hand. Well, I don't, because I don't have an iPhone. You have it at hand. And, you don't have to remember what the map looks like, what the terrain looks like. You just dial it up. And what's going to happen if the internet get destroyed? I mean, everybody will be lost. They don't know where the hell they're going, right? So I wonder whether that degree of, on the one hand, seems like a liberation. I don't have to remember all these things. Might be the same thing that constrains us because we don't know what the hell we're doing, because we rely on so much mechanics, that we don't know where we are. I mean, we probably even lost the idea of, let's say, if you get lost, not only do you lose your internet, but you try to ask somebody, how do I get to so and so, and he wouldn't know because the internet broke down. And so you used to be able to rely on that. If you get lost, at least you can find somebody and say, tell me how to get to so and so place. And he said, oh yeah, sure. You go down this road, you go. As I said in Kansas, I was going to somebody's house, and she says, just go down the road, turn over the bridge, and just follow the blacktop. That's all she said. And I was in Kansas, and I understood exactly what she was saying. I had to realize, oh yeah, I'm in Kansas. That's how they would talk. So yeah, yeah. All these mediums are liberating as we progress in an ever developing thing, but I think it's also constraining because we are in some ways isolated even to ourselves because we can't even remember what the hell happened to us. That's why we have to that's why everybody have to take a picture of their breakfast. It's like another reminder, like, this is what I had. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just sort of wondering. It just seems troubling to be a human being. How do we know anything?
Yes, I'm with you, Phil. Thanks. Zelig, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
The body reminds you, especially in your old age, if you've made bad decisions. That's something that I learned from older people than me. and I'm trying to change my lifestyle, my health decisions. Benjamin Franklin said, live like an old man so that you can live like a young man when you're old. So that's what I'm trying to do. But what interesting thing what we've been talking about, how the parts fit to the whole, and the Greeks understood a natural cosmic order, right? And how the laws reflected this character of the people. All of that has been brought under suspicion by Foucault. I think Foucault, through what Ferdinand de Saussure, a French linguist, he basically refuted this idea the language was connected to these ideas that Plato had postulated, that somehow the word dog told us something about ultimate reality of dog. And here comes Ferdinand de Saussure, and he says, no, dog is just a string of letters, that noises that we make as human beings, and with constant association, then we're able to understand each other. And at best, not even perfect. Language is not a perfect medium of exchange. You need to have a healthy ear. If you're born deaf, you're definitely not going to know what a dog is. These are just scratches on papers. There's really nothing transcendental about them, right? There is nothing sacred about letters or words. And so Ferdinand de Saussure is the one that spun off what we see in Derrida, but most specifically in Foucault, when he said, "What is man?" Right? Man is a construct, which he got from Nietzsche, right? And he kind of made it a little bit more popular in the 1960s. And he wrote the book, The Order of Things. And in it, he said, we're all these definitions of man that we hear from the Greeks, that we hear from the Christians, that we hear from, the ancient Hebrews, or that we hear from the Mesopotamians or Babylonians. It's just constructs. They're just social constructs to manipulate people for power. They're just there. It's just all there is power dynamics. This is where he comes back to Nietzsche, and he says everything is just about power trips. And so whenever you hear someone say man is, he would say, there you have it. You're just being manipulated. You're just being politically organized to carry the will of someone's interest. And then the conclusion that Foucault came to, right? He said, in Sagal Mundi, a very popular magazine in the 1960s, in Sagal Mundi, they asked him, so what do you think? You think you can get rid of power structures? They're like, oh, definitely not. I actually believe that power will never go away. There's always going to be someone on top and someone below. But I think there should be like sadomasochism, where you have a key word, and when you say it, then you get to switch around, and now it's my turn, right? And Foucault was gay at the time, and so it makes a lot of sense today. There's like, yeah, he was using his view of sexuality to define his politic. And so I think of today, and that's what we're living in, where we live in an era where we believe that we should have a social politic of sadomasochism, where we have keywords, right? Like every 4 years we say our keyword, and we say, now it's my turn. And that's how we like our politic today. And the thing is that that basically says, we believe everything is just power, it's a differential power, and that we're just switching around every 4 years. But in my opinion, and this is my opinion that I come to reading Foucault after 10, 15 years, and reading the modern skepticism, is that a lot of the problems came about in philosophy because philosophers were doing philosophy with pens. They were mostly lawyers, mostly through language. They understood philosophy through language and modernity. I should emphasize. And in my opinion, if like Nietzsche said, right, we got to do philosophy with the hammer. I believe that we should be able to start to do philosophy with the scalpel, because when you look at the way the body works, right, the organs. When Foucault said that HIV wasn't real, Foucault actually said, and he actually died of HIV. He said HIV is a social construct, and he died of HIV. He was proven wrong. It didn't matter that the CDC or the FDA was, putting out these notices in the 80s when he actually obtained HIV. Hey, this is a disease that is mortal and it can kill you. And Foucault's response was, that's a social construct. They're just making it up. And Foucault, because he didn't want to accept that it was actually something objectively real to the body, he died. And he actually hid it from the public, from his readers, that he had died of HIV, because he, at the same time, and anti-gayness, and um, these prejudices against that lifestyle at the time in the 80s was still a thing. So he kind of was ashamed of it. But the idea that he said that HIV was a social construct, he got disproven. And in my belief, modern man is not going to get out of the hole that he's in today, where everything is a social construct and everything is about power struggles, until he realizes that when you try to make your bodily organs function on methamphetamine, it will not. And it doesn't matter how much you tell it yourself that it will, then you're going to realize that your social politic, like the Greeks, has to go back to a politic of what benefits us health-wise. Like that, fundamentally, we come back to the body, in my opinion. I think that going back to religion, I think is too controversial. I don't think that's possible. I think that if we go back to a politic of what benefits our bodily organs as a society, and we promote the healthiness of it, we're actually going to be a better society. But until we do philosophy with the scalpel, that understanding that the heart can only function if you promote healthy lifestyles and diets in our societies, and our politics should be around that, then we're gonna get out of this modernity trip that we're in, where Foucault rules everything. He rules everything. He's behind everything, and everything is a social construct. And most of our philosophies look through language. And in my opinion, philosophy should be looked through doctors, a physician's lens. In my opinion, this is why I don't know if she's here today. She's a surgeon. That's why I love hearing her, because she has that eye. She has that worldview of looking at everything through the physiological lenses. I'm like, yes, that's the one. That's the correct one. Like, does it solve everything? No, but I know one thing for sure, though, that if you promote something bad for the heart, high cholesterol, you're probably, your heart's gonna tell you. Your heart's gonna tell you, and it's not a social construct. It's not a power trip. Your heart will stop functioning if you start feeding yourself methamphetamine every morning. Your body's gonna let you know that it ain't a social construct. And I think that once we go back to that in modernity, and we realize that, and we say, okay, there's objective truths, such as certain things for the heart are not good. According to the physics, the physiology of it, we need to start organizing ourselves around that. Let's do that. We're if we don't do that, I don't know where we're going. But in my opinion, that's looking at what the Greeks had. Yeah, there's something that we should take from them and say, we need to go back to the body. We need to have philosophers be doctors and physicians, not lawyers and poets, like Plato would say. So I come back to Plato. I'm anti-poet.
Thank you, Zelig. Yeah, so I'm glad you said all that today, because I mean, I was thinking all this stuff while I was reading the opening sentence of paragraph 12. I was thinking, oh, Zelig's gonna like this one. So, the ancients may not have always succeeded at living up to their value system, but at least they had the value system. And along with the value system, they had a language and a culture and a political structure and a history and a religion that all harmonized with that idea that the animals have something that we're missing. They have that phronesis. They know which direction the good lies in for them, the healthy. And they're interested in that direction. They it's inescapable to them. They have to look at it. They want to know. And we don't. We still have the capacity to have passionate interest, but it's been disconnected from phronesis. So we can be passionately interested in things that are bad for us or that are irrelevant to us. Like you were talking about, Foucault could attach himself to this idea that there's no such thing as HIV, but the power of his will didn't overcome the power of reality. The disease still got him. I'm glad you share that example. It's a really interesting one. And it goes to the heart of modernity in a nutshell, because Foucault, in doing and saying those things, was being a classic modern. That's the perfect expression of modernity. We think the perfect expression of modernity is winning or being right or being advanced, or all these things we praise ourselves for. But we don't understand Nietzsche's critique of us. When he writes The Will to Power, he's not saying that power is admirable and we should all get as much as we can. He's saying Homo sapiens has a will to power that makes a poor replacement for the will to phronesis that other animals have, right? They are drawn to phronesis, and we're drawn to just the power to carry out our whims, and our whims and phronesis are miles apart. So one of my favorite filmmakers is Carol Ballard. I might have mentioned him before. I can't remember. He got started as one of the cinematographers on the original Star Wars. And after that unexpectedly big hit, he then went on to, I'd say 4 out of 6 of his films are focused on nature, on animals, and the relationships between people and animals. So he did The Black Stallion, which most people have heard of. He did Never Cry Wolf, which when I was a teenager was one of my favorite films. He did Fly Away Home, and he did Duma. That was sort of his tetralogy of people animal stories. And Fly Away Home has a sequence in it where this young girl, I think she's 13, has adopted a clutch of Canada goose eggs that were orphaned by a construction project nearby, and they hatch and they imprint on her, and she is delighted with having this giant bevy of tiny things that adore her and follow her everywhere, and wannabe geese in her proximity, and want to know what she's going to do because they're looking to her to teach them how to be geese, right? They need a goose parent to help shape the expression of their character. And this subject is it's the major drama of the film. As a wildlife expert says, look, when the season comes, they're going to like in their hearts, they're going to be desperate to migrate south. But without a parent to show them the way, they're not going to know how to migrate. They're not going to have the practice. They're not going to know where to go. Their teleology will go unfulfilled because they lack the education and the guidance that's required to bring it to full fruition. And so over the course of the film, the story becomes, putting together a light flyer painted like a Canada goose, and teaching them, practicing with them over and over for longer and longer flights. And then it culminates in this great flight from Canada to their nesting grounds on I think it's the coast of North Carolina. I can't quite remember where it is they end up flying to. But it's a hell of a film. And it's really dealing with this issue of character, right? What is the character of the goose? They can't be pets, right? They didn't evolve to be pets. They evolved to travel every year. They need to do it. They're going to try. And, the only question is, are you going to help them express it well or express it poorly? And if they express it poorly, it leads to disaster. And the problem for Homo sapiens is we have that same capacity for intense drive, but disconnected from phronesis. So we need more help than the geese need, right? We need to also learn to be interested in the migration itself, not just in how to do it and where to go. We don't even know you need to migrate, if you will. It's like we're a step or two further back into trouble from these young geese in terms of the things we need help with in having expressed for us to live a life of sophosune, of focus on what's healthy. And so, this ties into what you're saying, Zella, because of course the issue is what would be healthy for us, instead of being straightforward in the way that it is for a Canada goose, is a complicated mess, mainly because we have such a poor compass internally for orienting towards what's healthy for us. We can argue about it, we can fight about it, we can make attempts, but we mostly don't know for sure where it is.
And let me add something, Rick. And that's something that, because I majored in biology, and studying how the cells work, how you go from the atoms to specific organs to the organism, right? And how the heart can work with completely foreign organs like the liver, and then from the liver, how can it work with with your heart, unrelated organs working with each other in such a way that there is the way that they send chemicals to be able to transfer energy from one domain to another. It's an amazing thing. It teaches you that society could be organized not based on Platonic theories, or not based upon what Descartes said, or what Kant said, but based upon just looking at biology. Like we can organize ourselves according to the way our organism functions. We have it here in ourselves.
Yeah.
But there's something so fundamentally wrong in us, where I would see all my classmates, and you would look around, and they're just going through this class because it's going to help them get employed and kind of, keep doing their thing. And then when they're asked in political science class, what do you guys think about the Constitution? And I remember in my sociology class, the professor had explained the theory of the different theories in sociology to the perfect point, and yet the students there were not able to understand it, and they had to take biology class to be in that sociology class. And it really comes down to the discussion that it's been extremely old. In biology, we call it pathologies, like the loss of memory.
Right.
I think in modernity we say, oh, some people can understand more through voice, or some people more through text, or some people through a mix of both, where they got to see and touch to be able to memorize things. In the ancient Hebrew understanding, or in the ancient ways, they would spiritualize it and say, no, it's sin that makes you not be able to retain these things, because you actually retain the evil. And it's a common understanding when you hear, no one teaches a kid, a little baby, how to lie or how to steal. Well, they just do it, like, did you take that cookie? And he knows he shouldn't take the cookie, but he has learned how to take the cookie. Who taught him that? Even if parents never taught him that, our instincts, right? And so I think that when according, even in today's biology, we know that there's certain people physiologically, who discussion of philosophy, of physiology, of social order, it doesn't create anything going on in the brain. There is no activity when you put them under the studies. There's really nothing. Whereas you see some kids that you put the neurological test on, and their brain is fireworks. And it's like, why is it that this kid's over here, just when he hears math or when he hears biology, his brains are like fireworks, and you put it in another kid and it's completely blank? But when you put on pornography on that kid, his brain is on fireworks. And you put it on another person and it's like, yeah, it's not as much. He doesn't have the addictive personality, right? And it goes back to what you're saying, Rick, where you have a predisposition to alcoholism. And the ancients would say that's the effect that we have. Everyone has inherited sin in different ways, right? Some is alcoholism, some is, sexual debauchery, someone is lying, someone is stealing, like all these, they're different portions of different sins that are expressed in our lives. And that's what it comes down to, because when I study biology, I'm like, hey guys, like, why we have a constitution that doesn't reflect biology here? This is like, we can learn a lot. It actually teaches us how to tolerate things that are not to tolerate difference, where not everything is a pinky, not everything is a toe, not everything is a brain. There's actually different organisms that actually don't even live together, and yet they benefit each other. Isn't that what we call diversity in our society? Why are we not looking at organs here, and come in with the new political science of the body, so that we can organize our society around this? And when I say that, people look at me crazy, and I'm like,
But the Greeks would have understood what you meant, right? This is what Kenneth Smith is saying. They would have said, "Yes, of course, Elig. That's why are you the only one saying it? Why aren't all these other people saying it too? How can they be so confused?" This idea that you use nature as your guide. Kata phusei, says Aristotle, over and over and over. According to nature, kata phusei, kata phusei, kata phusei. What is the logos? What is the intelligence of phusis that underlies the cosmos? And how do we learn from it where we're supposed to go?
And then the problem, and then I'll end this. The problem is, and then you have the lawyers that come in and they say, well, do you know the word tall? The word tall can mean tall and can mean a small cup. And so the words are ambiguous, and we can't really know what a word is a word. That's the end of a social order. Like when the lawyers came in, that's the end.
Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Just going to say, one of my observations, saying blue collar work and coming across that many people using stuff like methamphetamines. And actually, they're amazingly successful. You see people that have been indulging in these substances as a stimulant for maybe even a couple of decades. And that it's worked very well for them. But I had the thought that it's very much the nature of modern society that everywhere we see the desire for enhanced power. That is the answer. If I have a bad idea, I can make that bad idea work with more power. If I'm living a lifestyle which is not conducive to well-being, I can make it work with more energy drinks or more methamphetamines, more power. I'll feel, if I lack a sense of confidence, power will give me confidence. Anyway, I was going to bring up the question of psychism. I spent some time 30 years ago looking at worldviews. I actually put some of them in the chat, and you can look up the Stanford description of each of these worldviews. And now if we go to Hegel and, we get the word Geist, it seems from our perspective, he's talking about ideas. For Hegel, ideas are spirit. And this is a view which could find common purchase, but you look at the worldviews and it's actually a lot more complex than that. In the system of worldviews, for example, we have ideas. Hegel talks about ideas, a spirit. We have ideas. Oh, there's this stuff in my mind called ideas. Where does it come from? Is it matter? I've got a problem there. Matter seems a bit difficult, but I have these beautiful ideas just sit there and don't seem to react with matter. But for example, one view entailed in psychism, beyond idealism, is a belief that ideas might be able to directly influence matter. So I'm a psychic. I can bend that spoon, I can levitate an object. But this is partly true. We have a thing called a body. I give a command to my body, move that finger, and it moves that finger. And so one of the controversies is how this commands goes from something which just seems to be spirit to move a bodily part. Here it does seem to be moving some special kind of matter, our body. But that's psychism. Now, the step above psychism is the idea that this psychic force pervades the universe, which is known as pneumatism, the divine breath, the force. And it's beyond pneumatism you come to the worldview they defined as, used to call spiritualism, but they changed it to spiritism because spiritualism got a bad rap. And so there's this gradated stage. There is spirit, which starts to manifest as pneumatism, the divine breath throughout the cosmos, and then finds its space within the individual psyche. So you have psychism. And finally, it comes down to the level of the idea. And on another level, you can rise the other way. You can go from idealism to psychism. Can my ideas influence matter directly? Now, there's an important differentiation here, and that's between, for example, if we have physics, as we define it today, is a belief that there are laws of nature, laws of objective nature. Now, a rationalist will be very pleased with this. This just fits in with my perspective beautifully, that there are objective laws of nature. But of course, rationalism becomes a special case because it goes from objective nature to the subjective psyche. And rationalism starts to wonder, well, are there laws of the psyche? Can I measure the psyche? And the rationalists would say, yes, there's psychic elements, there's ideas, which are rational, which we're happy with, and there are other ideas which we call irrational. And so that's a difficulty. When we deal with objective nature, when we come up with laws of physics, it looks very 99.99%. This is working out. But when rationalists try to make that special case for the subjective phenomena of the mind, of ideas, well, no longer so easy, is it? It does seem to be the case. For example, we measure our internal being. I say, well, I was more angry yesterday than I am today. We're quantifying anger, we're measuring it. But it's not the precise measure that we're going to get in the world of objective physics, but the rationalists will keep on working away. Well, two of the worldviews which I have immense difficulty with are dynamism and monadism, both of which came from Leibniz. Now, dynamism is a worldview based upon the concept of power, but it possibly is more something related to the Tao than our concept of power, which is Faust. Punch through. Faust, if I've got a dumb idea, all I need is enough power, the fist, to punch through reality. Not understand how things work. Let's just give a reality a punch in the face and see how that works out. But yeah, I spent some time on these worldviews, and yeah, I gave some characterological ones there, and they're also defined as opposites. And this perspective comes from very much from a aspect of German idealism, which is not well known in the West. We know some of the greats, we know some of their main ideas, but a lot of the smaller stuff only remained in the German world, and you don't have access to it unless you find somebody who's bothered to translate it or you know German. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, there's so much to learn. There's so many different ways that these things can try to be explained and understood. And it's one of the interesting things about living in an anti-culture the way we do, is that we just assume or hope that other people are thinking close enough to the way we think that we can get something done, but we have really no idea. There's too many people. We can't even count them, let alone, work out what all their ideas are and whether they're compatible with how we would make a political system. We were sort of like caught in the tempest. You can see how it could take a tremendous amount of time and focus to try to learn representative sampling, even of kind of even just the ones you listed in the chat. And yet moderns notoriously are the busiest people in the world. They don't have time for things like that, which is probably not an accident, says Kenneth. Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, what's in my mind is maybe we've gone a little bit too far between the mind-body separation. And I think you need to have those integrated and be in balance. The difference between us and animals is that, yes, they have I guess what you call a planned thing that, instinct that allows them to be what they are. But the difference is that human beings have developed the mind on a very high level. And in some sense, that seems to be a difference that hopefully that we could maneuver to make it more productive in a way of living a good life and being moral beings. One of the things that, in a sense, animals may have a lack of, I'm not saying that totally absent from it, is a whole notion of inventiveness and creativity. We could see the possibilities in much more plentiful ways. Sometimes the possibilities are wrong, but nonetheless, we have progressed in something that, in a sense, that differentiates us to a certain degree from animals with instincts, even though we lack that. But we're replaced with this mind that, in a sense, could think and comprehend things in a way that's much broader, and has a way of like projecting into the future that's not just kind of like a mole groping around until you do something. When you look at all the animal species, they do evolve, but it takes a very long time, maybe tens of millions of years, if not longer. And human beings, like, despite the fact that we are not as smart as we think we are, we've come a long ways in the 200,000 years, and certainly even much more in the last 10,000 years since the agrarian revolution, which in a sense we invented. We discovered that there are things you could do. So, we wouldn't have things like art and philosophy, mathematics, all these things that are important in the way I think about it. We wouldn't have the concept of history. We would just have, one day after another, and it goes on until, something happens. So we got eaten by the lion or whatever it is. So I see it as an advantage in some sense, because we do have, like I said, art and culture and everything else. And I was thinking particularly of Euclid's fifth postulate. That really struck me when I heard about it. And apparently Euclid was a very, very mathematically intelligent person, plain geometry. I used to argue to people that, most people think the Bible is the most important book at least in Western civilization. And I said, nah, no. It's really Euclid's element of geometry, because it has a physical presence. Houses, stadiums, whatever, like roads, pretty much flat. That's all created in the sense that we have this concept of that. Now, maybe that's all wrong. Okay, maybe that doesn't have the biological basis to the degree that we want it to. But it just seems like we have blackboards, we have desk drawers, we have all sorts of things, right? And the fifth postulate, the thing is, like, for about 2,000 years, people didn't understand, like, why is this postulate here? Because they all believe in the first four postulates. They all seem to be right. It works. And it wasn't until, I think, the 17th century that somebody realized there's something about it that's a creative process that allows it to think in a different way. And that's when they discovered that parallel lines do meet. When you put it on a conical, a circular, a circular, a spherical sphere, that in a sense, and that completely changed and turned into a different kind of mathematics that we have. So in some sense, how did Euclid know, even though he couldn't maybe specify how it works, that was important, because that somehow addressed human creativity in some sense. And so, did the chimpanzees have the fifth postulate? Did cheetahs have fifth postulate? And maybe some of them actually bumped into something of that sort. What they began to mutate and transform into another species or something. So the fear I have is not that we have minds. I think that's a good thing. The fear I have is that we do not know how to control our minds and our creativity, you know. And when I saw the movie, what is it about? The recent movie about Oppenheimer, you know, and that the mind seemed to want to know, you know, and well, of course, there was an urgency to develop the atomic bomb. They want to know if it worked. And I remember, you know, when when he's a theorist, ran into the the engineers, the guy says, "Yeah, you might have all the ideas, but we're the one that make the things, right? And you need us." And he said the problem with the theories is that you don't know what's lying under the rock until you turn it over, right? And when he realized that, you know, like Rico Fermi says, you know, like chain reaction has a possibility of igniting the atmosphere and we will all be burned up, you know? And I myself in that position would have been very, very cautious because they said, try to work out what are the odds, you know? And I guess a great mathematician says, it's very, very slim. He said, well, could you tell us how slim it is? He says, I can't tell you that. I can also just say it's very slim. And I remember when they blew up the atomic bomb, everybody was, you know, apprehensive and they were all, but once it worked, they were all jumping up and down, cheering the whole thing. Okay. And I said to myself, are they cheering because they succeeded? Or are they cheering because they're still alive?
Right.
I, I did not know. I mean, I would have been cheering like, oh yeah, we're still alive. The atmosphere didn't burn up after all. But I think they were cheering because they succeeded, you know?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing because, yeah, because at that moment, it could be annihilation versus success, you know? And, you know, I think we do not have enough understanding to know when should we, I guess, keep Pandora's box closed. That's it, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Selig, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
It reminds me of a question I asked my microchemistry, microbiology professor, and it was during the pandemic. I asked him, why is there such thing as viruses, professor? And he's, you know, PhD, doctored in chemistry and microbiology. And he's all like, well, you know, it does make sense the way you're looking at it, right? Viruses do kill. But if you look at it, viruses are the perfect biological instrument for us to deliver vaccines into the human body. And when you look at them through the microscope, they look like these things are designed. They look like little robots, and they're made and they can go into your cells and they can deconstruct themselves and rebuild themselves and replicate themselves like a little factory. And so it is such those questions where it's like here as human beings, you know, we think about HIV, we think about Ebola, we think about the AIDS, and we're like, what in the world are these things doing in the world, which they take life, right? And a part of nature, it is death. I think thanatology, something that is not taught in our modern school, at least not in general education, which is death, by the study of death from a biological point of view. The little things that we know about is that cells are programmed to kill themselves after a certain amount of time. When they realize that they can no longer carry out the functions that they were supposed to do, they terminate themselves, and they're consumed by other organisms in the body. And I think it's a difficult concept, a difficult idea of like developing. Why do we develop the nuclear bomb? And it's along the same questions as why is there HIV in nature? Well, you look at primates. Primates actually benefit off of HIV. It's actually a part of their immune system. but to us human beings is actually a negative thing because we don't have the immune system to fight off HIV, which then turns into AIDS. Um, and the thing is that we actually kind of see that kind of phenomena in our governments. For example, you think about the CIA, which are when you study that history, you realize like, wait a minute, why in the world would you go to another country and destabilize their politics? Like, why would you do that? And most of us who are outside of that organism, we kind of don't see things like, and but then when if you're in there, you realize that things are so interconnected that these destabilizations do some kind of good that you're not privy to. And so it makes us think like, huh, so there's like some dark side to this world of what Freud talked about, the instinct towards, the what did he call it? Like like the death instinct, he called it. Or Heidegger talks about being towards death. And it makes me think like maybe that's why Heidegger was a Nazi. Like, he kind of understood that you kind of have to die sometime and you have to in a sense accept kind of these dark things and open Pandora's box because it's a part of nature. And then we see it in our own bodies, like our own, but our body is contributing to our own death as we speak right now. And it's designed for us to die. And sure, we have medication to help fight it off, but you're just slowing it down, but it's still happening. It's just you're just slowing down the train, but it's going to get off the rails. And so I think that aspect, I think it's a difficult, what you might call it a kind of dark philosophy or a dark science, where you really do have to make really hard decisions if you're the president of America to send assassins to another world because you see that there's some interconnection happening that might trigger other things that normal people don't understand. Like I can see that, right? I can see when my professor told me, like, yeah, viruses are a great vehicle for us to actually deliver life-saving vaccinations. Like, huh, I never really thought about that. I only thought about it from the perspective of AIDS kill, Ebola kills, but you don't also think about that the instrument by which Ebola is distributed is actually a life-saving thing as well in other organisms. So that's kind of makes me when Phil talks about, opening Pandora's box, like, yeah, it is true. There's a lot of things that we don't know and can see the connections.
Thanks, Elig.
So,
So
Zalik, for you, the Pandora's box is opening the door for Shiva. Shiva is one of the three main gods,
creation
So
and destruction. Yes. So we have an extra half hour here, which I'm going to take advantage of by moving us on to paragraph 14. We're doing 3 paragraphs
no,
today.
no. I want to hear from Donald because he had his hand raised and he lowered it. Donald?
Okay, Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I was only going to point out, probably for Phil, that we seem to have, well, we only see. I guess it's not. There's Socrates, and we sort of have all these secondhand things. And did Plato go beyond what Socrates was saying? And yet, in our discussions here, we often talk about how Kenneth went beyond Hannah Arendt. Now, nobody gets upset about that. I mean, and Hannah's still famous, and Kenneth isn't. So, maybe it's the inversion. Oh, hi. Okay, Stephen. I don't worry about. I worry about what she wrote and what I understand from what I read. There's no point in me going to Arendt or any other sociologist or philosopher to learn about Nazism other than to oppose it. I don't have any need of that knowledge, really. So, was she a Nazi? I don't know. She was a brilliant sociologist.
She hated
Just,
Nazism.
huh?
She hated Nazism. She's one of the main theoreticians voicing
Oh, yeah.
opposition to it and
Yeah,
dissenting.
yeah. Her origins of totalitarianism gets that was one of the books that I find just really shaped a lot of my thinking and was really led there by things I'd read of Kenneth. But yeah, we still don't grasp, I think, the full implications of things she says.
No.
At least I don't, you know. But, you know, I was going to also point out that, you know, things are a lot better now. They must be now than they were in 84 with the Constitution, because we removed there were lots of things there that broke our government apart because we were afraid of the demos.
Mm-hmm.
But we've removed the idea that the senators represented states, whereas congressmen represented people. So we got rid of that. So both houses of our Congress are populist, we'll say majoritarian. There's a great deal of, and to make our presidency, get rid of the electoral college, a lot of trying to do that. So it becomes majoritarian. And there's Chuck Schumer wanting, and who's the other guy, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, you know, that we need to fix the Supreme Court because these lifelong appointed judges, they get appointed by the wrong president, you know, well, they can just hang around and make life miserable. We want that to be majoritarian. So I think if we look at it from the Greek point of view, it must be because we think the demos has become of a higher quality, that we no longer needed the defenses against majoritarianism that the founding fathers or you know, our patriarchy, you know, put in to protect us from ourselves. So all I can think, the only justification for that is that we have become better citizens. So,
well, that's
if nobody found that funny, then I'm in the wrong group.
I find it hilarious. Because of course, there's the alternative, which is that the people who we entrusted to protect us from our baser impulses have, upon reflection and historical evidence, turned out to be at least as corrupt as everybody else. And so we no longer feel like letting them decide for us who gets the franchise and who doesn't. This is I was just having a discussion yesterday walking Green Lake with my father and stepmother about why the Reformation was in many ways a rebuttal against the entire promise of the medieval epoch. It was like, you know, supposedly the promise was we would never again have corruption like Rome because God would rule everything. And God is all good, all knowing, and he's everywhere, all powerful, and he's perfect. And so, you know, God can make us be good. And all we have to do is listen to his representatives on earth, and they'll tell us what God wants. But 1,000 years later, nobody was as corrupt as God's representatives on earth. And so we're like, I don't know what the answer is.
The fix was everybody reading the Bible for themselves and inventing their own religion.
Yes, that only goodness could follow. That's right.
Yeah, I know.
Next 500 years of history have clearly demonstrated that approach is so much better and doesn't lead to anything bad ever. So yeah, history. It's been a struggle.
See, we're getting better in all major fields: politics, theology.
Yeah.
You know, who knows?
It's just about perfect now. There's really hardly any room.
Yeah, that's the best of all possible worlds.
Yes. All right, paragraph 14. Biological life, the sustenance of vital needs, has its own sphere, the household. artifice and commerce, the making of commodities and profits, have their place in the market. And the tasks of culture and politics, which are the architecting of policies for the good of the whole polis, are carried out in the open space of the political forum. So he's continuing he's expanding on his paragraph 13 summation of Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. All of this is also in The Human Condition. But what he's doing is he's focusing it. And in that focus, it's gaining implications. It's clarifying implications that were present in The Human Condition, but are not as obvious. He's trying to basically put Hannah Arendt on the spot and make her stop intellectualizing and come out and say what's actually in her work. And what's actually in her work is this critique of modernity from the perspective of the ancient world. It says, to each sphere corresponds not just the sort of activity naturally appropriate for it, laboring, making, and acting. Where labor, work, and action are the three section heads that correspond to that in that book. But also the type of personality. Of course, by personality, he means character. The type of character for whom that activity represents the ultimate ceiling on its concerns and competence. And this is a critical issue. This idea that if everybody has infinite potential, there's no evidence to suggest that's true. It's not that it isn't true. Could be, but we see lots of evidence that people have ceilings on how far they can develop. If we imagine with Aristotle that the life of a mind capable of phronesis, a character containing sophrosune, if that is the mature adult form of Homo sapiens, if that's our arete, our special arete as a species, then we have to grapple with the fact that what we see before us in human societies is enormous numbers of people deviating off of that path and getting stuck at earlier stages of development and never going any further. They've got ceilings on their development. Now, why do they have those ceilings? Is it genetic? Is it cultural? Is it did they just have bad experiences that traumatize them? I mean, there's like as many hypotheses as there are people hypothesizing. Nobody really knows why this is the case. And we don't study it in the modern world because we just deny it's happening. We just keep insisting everybody's equal, despite all the evidence that people are not equal. And despite all the evidence that, frankly, we don't even believe that they're equal. Otherwise, we would let anybody who wanted to do brain surgery, which we don't. We know that people aren't equal. But they're not just unequal when it comes to sort of optional skills and knowledge. We seem to be unequal when it comes to stages of development towards maturity. And this is what he's saying is the Greek conception as described by Hannah Arendt in this book, is this idea that if people are going to be splitting off into these different stages of development and stopping there, then society needs to have arenas in which they can operate safely without hurting themselves or others, while still fully expressing what's inside of themselves. So he says, those inept for the exacting and calculating methods of the market, doulos or slaves, those are the ones who can't handle the market, are confined to the metabolic domain of life necessities. That would be the oikos, the household. And those philosophically and perspectively impaired for the adjudication of conflicting policies, and that would be banausoi, or the utility-minded, they're confined to the mercenary materialist zone of the market. So he's laying out the Greek concept of how the structuring is supposed to occur. And when you think about this, you can see how what Cornford's talking about in Thucydides' Mythhistoricus, Solon, the great wise lawgiver who did wonderful things for Athens, actually violated a fundamental precept of ancient Greek concept of humanity and politics. By giving the banausoi a vote, he was removing them from the market as their ceiling. He was taking the ceiling off and allowing them into the res publica, for which they're characterologically incompetent, because they can't philosophically or perspectively adjudicate conflicting policies, perspectives, ideas, and so on. They're incapable of it. It's not their character to be able to do that. And so if you give them the reins of power, They're not going to use them for the good of humanity. They're going to use them in a mercenary materialist way. That is to say, they're going to try to reduce the res publica to a market, because they think in terms of a market. They see the world in terms of market. Everything is a market. They're the man with the hammer, where the hammer is money and trade. So this is the struggle that we're talking about here. It's why the Thucydides Peloponnesian War is so relevant to all of this discussion. Is this is the place where, the Solon's grand experiment basically revealed itself as a catastrophic failure. Because even before Solon made that change, the Greeks already knew that Banausoi shouldn't be trusted with the reins of power. They already knew that. Solon did what he did for expedient reasons to try to increase Athenian power in the world. And he certainly did that, but he did so in the same way that, Oedipus increased his power by killing the king and marrying his mom and not understanding the consequences of his actions until it was too late. There is a way, and this is the point that Cornford makes in his book Thucydides Myth Historicus. There is a way in which the line from Solon through the Peloponnesian War is a tragic story that mimics Aeschylus and Aeschylean tragedy, in which people are given enough rope to hang themselves with, and then they proceed to do so. And that all the information that they need to see that what they're heading towards is catastrophe is in fact before them, being laid out one step at a time. But they don't recognize it because they're constitutionally, characterologically impaired. They're incapable of recognizing it. It's not part of their worldview to see themselves as potentially the main architect of their own disasters. They can only imagine external problems. And so the blind spot that they have is where the acorn of the poison tree is going to grow from that leads to the downfall of Greek civilization. It's fascinating stuff. If people don't have immediate things, I'm just going to take us on to paragraph 15 and 16 and wrap up. So I think we can finish section G today. So all of this, basically, I think that there is an accelerating quality to the way that chapter 4 is written. As the concepts build on each other one by one, the following paragraphs require less and less explanation. So here's paragraph 15, which includes a quote here. So it starts out, the ultimate coherence and longevity of the polis, its suitability as a matrix for cultivating a human quality of culture and values, depend, of course, not on the limited functions and virtues of domestics, the douloi, nor on the myopic self-interest of the commercial classes, the banausoi, but they depend on the priorities of laws and the enduring curricula of institutions that shape the riverbed of that society's life of values. That would be the aristoi, whose job is to be mythographers. Their job is to be religious. Their job is to be political, religious, mythic, all of those things at the same time by living a life oriented towards principles and figuring out where is phronesis, right? What direction? They need to try to simulate the compass that Homo sapiens is missing. What is the direction that leads us to greater health? And they have to be willing, they're the only ones willing to do that struggle and capable of doing that struggle because everybody else believes their own bullshit. They believe their appetites are good, or they believe their ideology is good. He says, the life of a culture cannot be assured by any mechanical or institutional means. This is the Greek concept of this issue. And you can see in it that this Greek concept essentially a priori 2,300 years beforehand is a refutation of the entire modernist way of life. Because we believe in systems. We think if something goes wrong, you should just pass another law and patch it up. And once you patch up the system of laws to cover all contingencies, then a utopia will follow. All we have to do is get enough laws and enough systems in place, and we'll build a better world. Once we're all reduced to cogs, then we'll all do what we're supposed to do and we'll all be happy. Dystopia is the core, it's the key of the modernist approach to the world from an ancient perspective. So he's saying here, it can't be assured by those means, but must be symptomatic of its dominant or authoritative form of character and the amplitude of their ethos. That is, it's the quality of the Aristoi who determine the belief system and the laws and the culture of any polis or civilization. I'm going to call on Zillig in a second. I'm just going to take us through this. He then says the values of the Aristoi have seldom been more lucidly argued than in Shaw's Man and Superman, where Shaw says, as long as I can conceive something better than myself, I cannot be easy unless I'm striving to bring it into existence or clearing the way for it. That is the law of my life. That is the working within me of life's incessant aspiration to higher organization, wider, deeper, intenser self-consciousness, and clearer self-understanding. Right? That is the boulder being rolled up the hill for all eternity, the struggle to get leverage against oneself, to achieve the Archimedean standpoint and use that leverage against yourself to make it possible to look beyond your appetites and ideologies to start thinking about what might be healthy for Homo sapiens. And I'll save the last paragraph for now and call on Zelig. Come off mute, Zelig, and tell us what's on your mind.
It makes me think of Freud. Freud definitely understood that we no longer lived in an era where Aristoi or any institution was to be believed. They were all to be doubted, and the therapeutic view he had of psychoanalysis was so that you can decide what is good for yourself, where you can change the barometer as to what is beneficial for you. But Freud did say, be sure to keep enough for civilization. And yeah, it's going to be annoying, but you know, that's the sacrifice you got to do as you in the market, right? In the markets you invest, and you can't expect 100% return from the market. In order for you to get some kind of benefit from the market, you got to accept that losing is winning in certain instances. And I think that has even failed, right? Psychoanalysis has even failed because ultimately it's like, well, Freud is trying to get us into his worldview. So when psychotherapy came into America, it eventually was, accepted for a while in the 1950s. And actually, we're still living in the culture of the therapeutic, where we do everything for the benefit of ourselves and we look at politics in that way. But ultimately, if we want to see a change in our society, we're starting to get there, because as we speak today, with the rise of Ozempic, with the rise of Elon's microchip, where you're implanted into your brain and you can actually control things, and it can actually send shock waves and control maybe depression, right? Hopefully he does that. We're starting to come back to the limitations of the body, where we are going to have to face the consequences that our ideas that are unlimited and seem to be infinite, they're going to have severe consequences for our bodies. And that's going to be the revolution, in my opinion, where we're going to start to realize that our bodies are severely limited by what the limits are, by what are the consequences of Ozempic, for example. Instead of having the character traits of a balanced and healthy life, of imparting chips into our brains, and knowing that you can't do that to replace healthy thinking as a character trait, instead of just putting a chip there and letting it do what it does. And our bodies are going to remind us. They're going to remind us that we need to have a life that respects our bodily organs. And we're getting there. We're definitely getting there, and I hope to see that day, because we're in the era where we believe we're gods. I think it was I think about the guy of Giovanni. His name is Giovanni something. I think he was like the first sociologist, and he said that human beings go through a cycle. They go through the era of the gods, the era of the heroes, the era of man, and then they go to the era of the beasts, and then they go into the era of the beasts to the era of the gods. And we're definitely in the transition of, we believe we're gods, or the beast and gods right there. And so, yeah, I think reading this, we're completely detached from the way that the polis should be organized and how the part fits the whole. Completely detached. Like there's we don't believe the Greeks. We find them suspect in everything they say. And hopefully the body is gonna remind us that we can't be having such hubris, such excesses, and we're definitely gonna pay for it, in my opinion. And we'll see. Well, I hope to see that day. Maybe Elon makes his robots and AI teaches us how to be human. And we're gonna still think we're gods, but who knows? I think seeing this is we're definitely detached from this.
Thank you, Zelig. Paragraph 16, last paragraph of section G. Yeah, we're flying through this thing today. Greek culture was the beneficiary of a true ethos, a higher code of values whose authority was rooted in eristic striving, self-discipline, and self-sacrifice. All men may comprehend what it is to act with practical sense in order to achieve a finite and useful result. But only Aristoi truly grasped what it is to act for the sake of what is higher than one's own ego and its narcotic narrow interests. In other words, not just mere appetite and not just mere use value or accomplishing goals, but to transcend both of them. And yes, narcotic, to transcend the incredible seductive draw that they both have on our psyche, which can only happen if you fully accept and understand that these sirens, one on each shoulder, are constantly calling you to reduce yourself back to a Dulic or Banausic perspective. Only the Aristos were willing to struggle against that in order to generate a true ethos for their society. Values and principles ultimately mean something substantive only to those few who can rise above cloying egocentric mentality. Right? In other words, what a doulos calls a value or a principle and what a Banausos calls a value or a principle, those are false. They're not actually values or principles because both of them are addicted to their own egocentric mentality, which is cloying, he says, but also is suffocating. It's like it's worse than having blinkers on. He describes it as being inside of an envelope. You can't actually see the world or anything else. You can't even see yourself clearly. Under the Christian worldview, by which he means the medieval worldview, such exceptions are deemed saints, to which I would parenthetically add, or heretics, right? People who do those sorts of things are clearly not normal. And the medieval worldview recognized that and had places for people like that. But under the modern, people like that have become statistically inconsiderable, invisible and futile paradigms. And since paradigms here kind of means a defining example, what we do is we watch a proto-Aristos end up dead or in jail or in an insane asylum or homeless, and we say, wow, I certainly don't want to live like that. I think I'm going to turn back towards my Dulic and Banausic natures because society will allow me to survive those ways, but it will not allow me to survive if I try to engage in any serious eristic behavior. Society is absolutely hostile to Aristeia and ensures that none of it ever lasts. So this is where he ends section G on character and class, where with this contrast to the medieval and modern worldviews, which he's going to talk about for the rest of the book. The last section in chapter 4 about the ancient worldview is going to talk, section H, sophism and corruption, is going to talk about what happened to Greek society, why did it collapse? And in putting this last in chapter 4, he's echoing Gilbert Murray's 5 stages of Greek religion, where the Greeks, where Gilbert Murray lists the last stage as the failure of nerve, when the Greeks turn away from eristic striving to embrace a simpler escapist solution. So the next few weeks, maybe the next month in which we go through section H, be a little uncomfortable. It's not going to, these are not the glory days of the Greeks we're about to talk about, but they're important, right? To set us up for understanding the transition into the medieval epoch that follows, which over half the book is going to be about. So Zelig, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
his term of narcotic, that's such an amazing, it captures our era. Like today, if you hear a Christian that tries to help people get out of narcotics, they're like, what's in it for you? There's an immediate suspicion of, you don't do it for the sake of a transcendental reason. You're doing it to charge the government that Newsom has funded billions of dollars so that you can get paid.
Right.
And what's sad is that when you do research, it turns out that the people helping the homeless people, they're earning $200,000, $300,000 a year helping the homeless. And so you're like, I wonder if you really want to end homelessness, because it's paying off $300,000 of your salary. And those are the discussions that many of these people that sadly have fallen into drug addiction, they're like, yeah, these people are just giving us food because they're collecting a check. And that's the ethos that we're living in. There's an ultimate suspicion there that you're really not doing it for real, true self-sacrificial motives.
Right.
And it's just his term right there, the just the narcotic narrow interest. Oh my, like social media, you publish on social media because if you get enough likes, you get paid. You get paid money. And so you're no longer doing research so that you can actually inform people for some altruistic motive. Now it's like, oh, he's doing it to get paid. You're putting out content to get paid. Everything, like, there is no such thing as self-sacrificial character traits anymore. That doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's impossible. And I think Marx did bring that up when he said that the bourgeoisie, talk about in another life. It's they kind of provide religion as the opiate of the masses so that they can make them work hard and not have to complain about wages because their rewards are in heaven. I think that does contribute to the suspicion, to the epistemology of suspicion that we're currently under, where there is no true goodness in the world. He caught it. He's right on the money.
Yeah, he aspires to Nietzsche's ferocity in being a culture critic of our own situation. He talks about what he calls the fine art of execration, of being able to call a turd, being able to just directly and uncompromisingly point right at the worst things and say that is among the worst things, and not to tiptoe around it. So yeah, terms like narcotic, he thinks about that stuff before he writes that word, because he's trying to figure out how to convey that sense of helplessness, the way in which people capitulate to their appetites and narrow interests. It is narcotic. It's a dependency. And Nietzsche said the same thing, but in other language. And Kenneth is trying to find a novel ways to get the point across to us. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, the sentence in paragraph 15 about that the culture is symptomatic of its dominant and authoritative form of character and the amplitude of their ethos made me think we are called a litigious society, and I'd always thought of that as being the quantity of litigation was what made it. But actually, I think it's all the people and head of all government agencies are lawyers. It is their character, the most fundamental character that dominates our society is the character of lawyers. They have all the levers. And before that, of course, he our saving thing that we think, which I already think we're drifting away from, but it seems to indicate it wouldn't do any good. There are no institutional means for avoiding this, which is our checks and balances. We think there's a system of checks and balances. But the people in charge of the checks and the balances are all of the same character. And so, you know, we're pretty well done. And that's among what we'd call not by character they are heuristic, but by guiding function within society. That would be our leading or authoritative class. But something similar, I think even our Banausic class, whereas business, I think, really started by people that wanted to do things or make things or something like that. It was an engineering class of people. But now they are an MBA dominant. That thing is, again, dominated by another character that you almost never find a company anymore that makes a widget run by a guy who or a girl. I'll make that clear, not trying to be sexist here, who just lived and dreamed widgets all their life and finally did it. It will be some guy out of a business school that knows all the ratios of how you divide your money up and how you finance your capital and stuff. It'll have nothing. He'll know nothing about widgets. So there are even corrupt forms of. We probably don't even have decent slaves anymore. They're somehow been corrupted. I don't know how. I'm just going. But since our other characterological divisions have been so corrupted, it wouldn't surprise me that we could think for a while and figure out what the modern corruption of character is.
Yeah, I mean, this is what you're saying is definitely, and I'm going to wrap up on this point because we do have to wrap up, but this is what underscores these last 3 or 4 paragraphs is this idea that if it is the job of the Aristoi not just to tell other people what to do, that's not governing in the ancient sense, that's the modern sense of governing, but rather to lift everybody up so that they can express the best parts of what they have. They may be characterologically backward. They may not have developed from Douloi into Banausoi or from Banausoi into Aristoi. They may be stuck at a stage of development, but that doesn't mean that they can't express themselves at that stage in better or worse forms, healthier or sicker forms. And the purpose of Aristoi isn't to stand there with a whip and make everybody do what they want. It's to help everybody at whatever stage of development they're at flourish as well as they can. And that flourishing is necessary for 2 reasons. One of them is you certainly don't want the worst forms of Douloi or Banausoi, to propagate in your society. You want the best forms to be out there. However good a Doulos or a Banausos can be, that's what you want out of them. You don't want to see them at their worst because the abyss goes all the way to the bottom, all the way down.
Yeah.
All I gotta say, Rick, is lawyers are our modern day poets, and I think Plato was right. We got to kick. They're a whole bunch of snakes. They mess up philosophy in society. In my opinion, lawyers. As a matter of fact, if you want to become a lawyer, you actually get a philosophy degree to make it into law school. They don't say that for doctors and physicians. For doctors and physicians, they say get a biology degree. So to become a lawyer, you basically are put down a philosophy track. And in my opinion, that's actually what's corrupted philosophy and corrupted our modern society. It's lawyers. Lawyers have corrupted our society. And if I was a super billionaire, if I was Bezos, I would fund a whole school of a track of doctors that have their root bases in philosophy. That would change society, in my opinion.
Well, I think what Rick said also reinforces something I've often said, that Plato's Republic is trying to solve the problem of where to find all the philosopher plumbers.
Yes. You can find them in the hospitals and but welders, plumbers.
All right.
And on that note, I had a great time today. I hope you guys did too. We'll pick this up next week. And by this time next week, I will have had a visit from Sharon, who's coming to Seattle. She and I are gonna hang out next Sunday. So we'll have that to talk about too.
It's a philosophy with the scalpel right there. That's what I want to see.
That's right. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye, Rick.
Bye.